The sea has always kept its secrets. For centuries, ships have sunk into the depths, and with them, entire worlds of knowledge have been swallowed whole. In 1901, divers searching for sponges descended into the dark waters off the island of Antikythera and stumbled upon something that should not have existed. Among shattered statues and broken amphora lay a mass of green corrosion, heavy and silent, forgotten by time. To most, it was nothing more than scrap, yet within it, gears were sleeping. Gears that should not have been possible for an age more than 2,000 years old. When the fragments were finally studied, scholars faced a riddle. How could the ancients build a machine capable of reading the sky, predicting eclipses, and charting the movements of planets? The rusted object seemed to whisper that history is not a straight path, that knowledge can surge forward and then vanish into silence, leaving only traces buried beneath the sea. The Antikythera Mechanism stands as both a marvel and a warning, a message from a forgotten craftsman telling us that the past is deeper and stranger than we dare to believe. If mysteries like this stir your imagination, I invite you to journey with me into the shadows of history. Subscribe to the channel so you will not miss what lies beneath the surface. And before we continue, tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time of day it is, because every perspective adds to the chorus of curiosity that carries us across oceans and across centuries. Under the surface of the Aegean Sea, the light fades quickly and the world becomes silent except for the hiss of air and the rhythm of a diver's breath. In 1901, men descended into these waters, not as explorers of mysteries, but as laborers in search of sponges to sell at market. They were strong men, used to the pressure of the depths and the monotony of their work, but on that day, their routine would fracture. The sea would reveal something buried for nearly 2 millennia, a discovery that seemed to come not from their world, but from another age entirely. At first, the divers noticed scattered pieces of marble and bronze lying across the seabed. Broken limbs of statues stared with blank eyes through their masks. Fragments of amphorae lay cracked like eggshells among the rocks, and the ribs of a ship, long since collapsed, stretched like the bones of a dead giant. This was not unusual for the waters of the Mediterranean, which had swallowed countless vessels across centuries of trade and war. The divers gathered what they could and signaled to the surface, their baskets filled with relics that promised profit. Yet one of them saw something stranger. It did not gleam like the bronze arms or carry the graceful shape of marble torsos. Instead, it was a lump encrusted with barnacles and corrosion, jagged and unappealing, heavy to lift and awkward to carry. The diver hesitated, but instinct compelled him to haul it up. He could not have known that within the corroded husk, gears were sleeping. Gears that whispered of a forgotten genius who had crafted them long before his birth. When the wreck was reported, scholars and officials took note. The statues excited them, works of artistry that could decorate museums and inspire pride. The amphorae told of trade routes, the ship's hull of construction techniques, all things that fit neatly into the known map of antiquity. But the strange mass of metal was set aside. It looked like waste, something ruined by time, and for months it gathered dust, its secret unnoticed. It was only when careful eyes inspected the fragments more closely that something remarkable emerged. Fine ridges cut into the bronze revealed themselves as teeth of gears, arranged with purpose. The corrosion could not hide their precision. These were not rough or accidental shapes, but deliberate mechanical components. The scholars who saw them at first could not believe what they were looking at. The very idea of interlocking gears used to model the heavens belonged in their minds to an age far later than the world of Greece in the 2nd century before the Common Era. Yet the evidence lay in their hands, undeniable and silent. Imagine the moment when realization spread through the room, when the corroded mass ceased to be scrap and became a riddle. This device had rested at the bottom of the sea since the ship carrying it had gone down. Perhaps in a storm, perhaps in violence, its knowledge sealed away beneath salt and stone. The Antikythera wreck had already given the world statues of gods and heroes. But the true marvel was this mechanism, a relic that should not have existed. For the people of 1901, the discovery was almost too strange to grasp. How could artisans of the ancient world create a machine with such intricacy, a machine capable of doing what clocks and computers would not achieve for more than 1,000 years? The scholars debated, some dismissing it as coincidence, others daring to wonder if the ancients had reached heights long forgotten. Slowly, the weight of evidence overcame doubt. The mechanism was real, its gears intentional, its design far beyond what the textbooks of the time allowed. As the fragments were studied further, the shape of its purpose began to appear. This was no toy or ornament. This was a device meant to track the movements of the heavens. It could predict eclipses, follow the wandering of planets, and mark cycles of time like the Metonic cycle, and even the timing of the Olympic Games. It was, in essence, a window into the sky, crafted with such care that its broken pieces still spoke across centuries. For the divers who first pulled it from the seabed, the mechanism was nothing more than a heavy stone. They could not have imagined that they were holding one of the most extraordinary machines ever created. For the scholars who later touched its corroded gears, it was a revelation that shook the certainty of history. For us who look back today, it is both a marvel and a haunting question. If a machine like this could exist more than 2,000 years ago, what else might have been built and then lost? How many triumphs of human knowledge have slipped beneath the waves or crumbled into dust, leaving us with only fragments and whispers? The discovery beneath the waves off Antikythera is not just a story of chance and recovery, it is a reminder that history is fragile. Knowledge can blaze bright for a moment and then vanish, buried by war, disaster, or neglect. What remains is left for us to stumble upon centuries later, often by accident, and each time we do, the boundaries of what we think we know must be redrawn. The Antikythera Mechanism waits in silence for those who are willing to listen, a voice from the past speaking through rust and broken gears, urging us to reconsider the true depth of human ingenuity. Under the dim lamps, the museum storage rooms, the fragments looked unremarkable. They were pieces of bronze crusted with salt, their shapes broken, and their surfaces scarred by centuries of corrosion. To the casual observer, they seemed like little more than junk retrieved from the seabed, remnants of a ship's cargo that had endured the merciless crush of time. Yet, hidden within these fragments lay the voice of a forgotten age, a whisper that only patience and careful study could hear. When the first scholars began to examine the pieces, they expected no more than shards of ordinary metal. The statues and amphorae had already drawn the attention of collectors, but these small, corroded lumps were set aside, waiting for someone willing to look closer. It took years before anyone recognized that these fragments were not random at all. One fragment in particular revealed, under careful cleaning, the tiny ridges of interlocking gears. They were delicate, precise, and utterly shocking. Such craftsmanship seemed out of place in a world that, according to accepted history, had not yet known mechanical clocks. Each fragment was catalogued and given a number. Like bones from an ancient body scattered by the sea, together they formed a puzzle. 82 fragments in total would eventually be identified, some large, some no bigger than a coin, each carrying traces of the whole. The largest fragment, heavy and jagged, displayed a cluster of gears frozen in rust. Other pieces contained inscriptions so faint they could barely be seen, lines of Greek letters etched into the bronze as instructions or records of its use. Slowly, the scholars began to realize that they were not looking at broken scraps, but at the remains of a machine more complex than anything they had imagined possible for its time. The fragments told a story even in their ruined state. The placement of the gears suggested ratios carefully calculated to match celestial cycles. The inscriptions hinted at knowledge of eclipses and planetary motions. To decipher these details required not only expertise in ancient languages, but also the curiosity of engineers who could see beyond the corrosion. It was as though the machine was speaking across centuries, but its voice was cracked, words missing, leaving the listener to fill the silence with imagination and deduction. In the early 20th century, the available tools for studying such fragments were limited. Scholars relied on magnifying glasses, hand drawings, and intuition. Many dismissed the idea that these could form a coherent device. Some argued that the gears must have been decorative or perhaps accidental formations of corrosion. Yet others insisted that the precision was undeniable, that nature does not carve perfect teeth in bronze. The debate itself was a reflection of human reluctance to revise the story of progress. If the ancients had built such a machine, then the timeline of technology would have to be redrawn. As decades passed, the fragments became objects of fascination. Each time new eyes studied them, new details emerged. Engineers traced the outlines of gears, astronomers compared the inscriptions to known cycles, and historians asked what kind of society could have produced such an object. The fragments resisted easy answers. They were incomplete, shattered by the violence of the shipwreck and the erosion of the sea. Reassembling their purpose was like trying to rebuild a dream from only a handful of memories. Yet in their incompleteness lay their power. Because the fragments did not reveal everything, they invited speculation. They forced the imagination to wander. Perhaps the device was not alone. Perhaps others had been built and lost. Perhaps the knowledge of gearing and celestial computation had once been more widespread, only to be silenced by war or catastrophe. Each fragment was both evidence and absence, a glimpse of genius and a reminder of how fragile knowledge can be. The mysterious fragments of the Antikythera Mechanism are more than broken pieces of bronze. They are echoes of human ambition, proof that even in the ancient world, minds dared to reach for the heavens with tools of metal and calculation. To hold one of these fragments is to feel the weight of time pressing down, to sense the presence of a craftsman whose name is lost, whose skill defies the categories of history. The corroded gears no longer turn, the inscriptions are half erased, but together they form a question that still lingers like a haunting tide. What else once existed, and how much has been forgotten beneath the waves? Under the world of ancient Greece, the night sky was not a place of empty darkness, but a vast and living map. To men and women who lived without the hum of engines or the glow of electric light, the heavens stretched overhead with a clarity that few in the modern world can imagine. The stars were not distant fires scattered at random. They were patterns woven into myth, guides for sailors on the sea, calendars for farmers tending their crops, and omens for kings seeking the favor of the gods. To understand the Antikythera Mechanism, we must first enter the world that created it, a world where the movements of the heavens were the most profound mystery and the highest science. In the 2nd century, before the Common Era, Greece was a land of knowledge as well as conquest. The cities bustled with traders and philosophers, artisans and astronomers. The legacy of thinkers like Aristotle and Plato still shaped the way people understood nature, but new figures were pushing the boundaries further. Hipparchus of Nicaea charted the stars with a precision that astonished his peers, noting the subtle drift of their positions across generations. Archimedes in Syracuse explored the powers of levers, pulleys, and mathematics, his mind reaching into realms of engineering that seemed almost magical. These men were heirs to centuries of thought, and at the same time the forerunners of discoveries that would echo across millennia. It was in this intellectual climate that a device like the Antikythera Mechanism could be born. The Greeks did not see the heavens as abstract physics, but as a realm intertwined with human life. The timing of festivals, the prediction of eclipses, the cycles of planets, all were matters of religious importance and practical necessity. To look at the sky was to read the clock of the universe itself, and those who could interpret its signs held power and respect. Imagine the awe of an audience when a philosopher or priest turned a crank and a set of bronze gears traced the course of the moon across its phases, or showed the approach of an eclipse. To the untrained eye, it must have seemed as though the very cosmos had been captured in a box of metal. The Greeks built temples to honor their gods, but they also built observatories of the mind, places where observation and mathematics merged. The Antikythera Mechanism reflects this dual devotion to beauty and reason. Its gears are not merely functional, they are elegant, their ratios calculated with artistry. The inscriptions that survive speak not only of cycles of time, but of the reverence with which they were guarded. This was a culture that sought to bridge myth and measurement, to see the gods in the stars, and at the same time to understand the mathematics that guided their paths. Consider the sailors who navigated the Mediterranean, steering by the constellations that rose and set over the horizon. For them, the heavens were a map more reliable than parchment. Consider the farmers who sowed their fields according to the rising of certain stars, their harvests tied to celestial rhythms. Consider the rulers who demanded to know the signs of the heavens before declaring war or celebrating peace. For all these people, the sky was not distant, it was immediate and essential, and the knowledge of its cycles was a form of survival. In this context, the Antikythera Mechanism becomes less of an anomaly and more of an expression of the Greek hunger to understand. It was not magic, but the natural extension of centuries of observation, refined through the skills of artisans who could cut gears with astonishing precision. The fact that only one such device has survived does not mean it was unique. Only that time has been merciless in what it preserved. Perhaps there were others, lost to decay or buried in wrecks yet undiscovered. Each fragment of bronze is a reminder that knowledge is fragile, and that the brilliance of an age can be erased by the silence of centuries. The world of ancient Greece reminds us that progress is not a straight line, but a series of bursts and pauses. In the glow of oil lamps, philosophers debated the nature of the cosmos, while in workshops hidden from history, craftsmen shaped bronze into forms that mirrored the heavens. Out of this blend of thought and skill came a device that still humbles us today. The Antikythera Mechanism is more than an artifact, it is a reflection of a culture that dared to see the sky not only as divine but as knowable, and in doing so, left behind a legacy that continues to haunt our imagination. Beneath the glass cases of museums and within the pages of careful reports, the fragments of the mechanism remained for years, waiting for minds willing to see what lay hidden. The corrosion clung like a mask, disguising the truth beneath it, yet slowly the veil began to slip. Scholars leaning close to the green incrustations saw what their predecessors had missed. There were not only inscriptions scratched into the bronze, there were teeth, lines of small ridges cut with a precision too exact to be dismissed. When light struck the fragments at the right angle, the truth glimmered. They were gears, unmistakable and deliberate, locked forever in silence by rust. The realization struck with force. In an age when most believed that the ancients had no machines beyond simple pulleys and levers, here lay evidence of something astonishing. The fragments contained at least 30 interlocking gears, each with teeth carved to specific ratios. These were not decorations nor accidents, but purposeful pieces of engineering. The gears suggested movement, rotation, a dance of bronze that once mirrored the motions of the cosmos. What had been dismissed as scrap now demanded reverence. Imagine holding a fragment in your hand. The weight is heavy, the surface rough, yet beneath the corrosion you can feel the outline of teeth, evenly spaced, meant to turn against each other. You picture them moving once, oiled and gleaming, part of a greater mechanism enclosed in a wooden case. Turn a crank and the wheels within would come alive, carrying dials that trace the course of the moon, predicting the path of the sun, showing the approach of eclipses. It is as though the very sky had been condensed into gears and shafts. The unveiling of the gears was more than a technical discovery. It was a revelation that the story of technology was not as simple as a steady climb from ignorance to knowledge. Here was a leap, a glimpse of brilliance in an age long past, a whisper that civilizations may rise to heights and then fall into silence, leaving only fragments for the future to puzzle over. The scholars debated, some arguing that the mechanism must be a fluke, the creation of an isolated genius. Others believed it was proof of a broader tradition of craftsmanship, now lost. The debate continues even today, fueled by the mystery of why only one such device has survived. The gears themselves tell their own tale. Their ratios match cycles known to ancient astronomers. One set corresponds to the 19-year Metonic cycle used to harmonize solar and lunar calendars. Another seems linked to the Saros cycle, which predicts eclipses with uncanny accuracy. The more the fragments were studied, the clearer it became that this was no toy. It was a serious instrument, built with purpose, serving as a bridge between observation and prediction. It captured not only the present sky but the future, giving its owner power over time itself. The unveiling of the gears also revealed the craftsmanship of their maker. Each tooth was cut by hand, yet with precision that rivals modern machines. Bronze, an unforgiving material, had been shaped into forms so exact that they could mesh and move smoothly. This required not only mathematical knowledge but also practical skill, the ability to translate ratios and cycles into metal. Behind the mechanism must have stood minds trained in both science and craft, philosophers and artisans working together to embody the heavens in bronze. The moment the gears were recognized, the Antikythera Mechanism ceased to be a curiosity and became a challenge. How could such a device exist in the 2nd century before the Common Era? What does it say about the level of knowledge possessed by the ancients? Did they build others like it? And if so, why have none survived? Was the knowledge deliberately hidden or simply swept away by time and conquest? The questions outnumber the answers, yet each gear, each fragment, stands as undeniable proof that the ancients achieved more than we had ever credited them with. From that moment on, the study of the Antikythera Mechanism entered a new era. The unveiling of the gears was the key that opened the door, transforming corroded lumps into a machine that speaks across centuries. It is a reminder that history is never as simple as we imagine, that brilliance can emerge, shine, and be forgotten, only to be rediscovered by chance. The gears no longer turn, but in their silence they continue to move the imagination, drawing us deeper into the mystery of what was once possible beneath the hands of forgotten craftsmen. The fragments of the mechanism sat in silence as decades passed, yet the more carefully they were studied, the more their hidden order came into view. What at first seemed like scattered wheels of bronze revealed themselves as a coherent system. The gears were not random, they were not decoration, they were the bones of a machine designed with intent. Scholars began to trace the shapes, to count the teeth, to sketch the patterns, and slowly the science behind the mechanism emerged like a constellation taking shape from scattered stars. Each gear carried a number of teeth carefully chosen to represent celestial ratios. A wheel with 223 teeth paired with another of 15, together encoding the Saros cycle of eclipses that repeats every 18 years and 11 days. Another series of gears mapped the Metonic cycle of 19 years in which the phases of the moon align once more with the solar calendar. There were gears to show the anomalistic month, the shifting distance of the moon as it circles the Earth, and gears that reflected the synodic motion of planets wandering through the night sky. It was a machine of cycles, a bronze translation of time itself. Imagine standing before it when it was whole, enclosed in a wooden box, polished, oiled with dials across its face. The owner turns a crank and the wheels within begin to move. On the front dial pointers show the sun and moon marching through the zodiac. Another pointer reveals the phase of the moon, waxing and waning in step with the heavens above. On the back dials, other hands trace the Metonic cycle, the Calippic cycle, the Saros and Exeligmos cycles, predicting eclipses long before they darken the sky. To the one who turned the crank, it must have felt as though the universe had been captured and tamed, its mysteries made visible through the turning of bronze. The science behind the machine reveals not only the genius of its maker, but also the tradition of knowledge it drew upon. Ancient astronomers had long observed the heavens, recording eclipses, tracking planets, measuring cycles. The mechanism embodies that accumulation of data, transformed into gears and ratios. It is not simply a calendar, it is a mechanical cosmology, a model of the sky reduced to a device one could hold and operate. Where a scholar might need tables and scrolls, the owner of the mechanism needed only to turn a handle. Knowledge that once filled books was now inscribed in bronze. The precision required to cut such gears challenges even modern craftsmen. Each tooth had to be uniform, each wheel aligned to mesh perfectly with its neighbors. Errors would accumulate quickly, and the machine would fail. Yet the surviving fragments show remarkable accuracy, as though the artisan understood not only the theory, but the practice of fine engineering. This fusion of science and craft is rare in any age. It demands minds that can think in ratios and cycles, as well as hands that can shape metal to match. The study of the mechanism also revealed inscriptions along its plates. These faint lines of Greek letters describe the functions of the dials, marking dates of eclipses, noting which star constellations would be affected. They are the user's manual of antiquity, guidance for the one who turned the crank. Together with the gears, they make clear that the device was not a toy, but an instrument of knowledge. It was built to inform, to demonstrate, to calculate. Its presence suggests that the Greeks of the Hellenistic age had reached a level of technical understanding far beyond what had been assumed. When modern scientists reconstructed the gearing, they found that the mechanism could model not only lunar and solar cycles, but also planetary motions. Though incomplete, the design suggests a scope even greater than what has survived. It was, in effect, the first known analog computer, a device that processes information through mechanical parts rather than numbers on a page. To see this in a culture more than 2,000 years old is to be reminded that progress is not inevitable, that the heights of knowledge can be reached and then lost, their memory scattered like fragments across the sea floor. The science behind the Antikythera Mechanism is a testament to human curiosity. It reflects a culture that did not stop at watching the heavens, but sought to capture their order in a machine. It demonstrates that the desire to understand, to predict, to master time itself is not modern, but ancient, as old as civilization itself. The gears may no longer turn, yet the logic they embody still moves, teaching us that even in the past, long before modern clocks and computers, the human mind reached for the stars and found ways to bring them down to Earth. The face of the mechanism was more than a collection of dials. It was a map of time itself, a calendar that tied the turning of gears to the rhythms of the heavens. To those who looked upon it in its prime, the device must have felt like a window into the very heart of the cosmos, a machine that revealed the order behind the seeming chaos of the sky. It did not simply show hours or days. It displayed cycles measured across decades, cycles that governed eclipses, lunar phases, and even the timing of human celebrations. In its bronze wheels, the universe became predictable, tangible, something one could hold in the hands. At the center of its science stood the Metonic cycle, a span of 19 years after which the phases of the moon returned to the same days of the solar calendar. Farmers had long known that planting and harvest were tied to celestial rhythms. Priests and rulers needed to know when festivals should be held, when rituals must be observed, when the games of Olympia would commence. The mechanism embodied this cycle with precision. Gears meshed to reduce the vastness of 19 years into the smooth rotation of a dial, a revolution of bronze mirroring a revolution of the heavens. Beyond the Metonic cycle, the device carried the Calyptic cycle, a refinement that multiplied the 19 years by 4 to create 76, improving accuracy even further. Then there was the Saros cycle, 223 months, by which eclipses could be predicted with uncanny precision. The mechanism did not merely indicate that an eclipse would occur, it suggested which type, solar or lunar, and in which constellation of the zodiac the shadow would fall. For the ancients, this was not only knowledge, it was power, the ability to foresee moments when the gods seemed to draw their curtains across the sky. On its front face, the mechanism displayed the zodiac, the band of constellations through which the sun and moon and planets appear to wander. By turning a handle, one could advance time, watch the moon wax and wane, watch the sun march across the sky, and see planets align. Inscriptions beside the dials named the signs, guiding the user through the celestial theater. For sailors, this could mean safer journeys. For priests, it meant the ability to align rituals with cosmic patterns. For rulers, it meant omens could be read, not as chance, but as scheduled events. The calendar of the cosmos, encoded in the mechanism, reminds us that the ancients were not passive dreamers gazing at the sky. They were observers, counters, recorders, mathematicians in their own right. They knew that the heavens moved in cycles, and they sought to capture those cycles in a form that could be trusted. Instead of memorizing long tables, instead of consulting oracles alone, they could turn to a device that translated the mysteries of time into motion they could see and touch. The mechanism was the sky made mechanical. What makes this achievement even more striking is the harmony of its design. The front dials showed the dance of sun and moon through the zodiac. The back dials revealed the longer cycles, the metonic, the saros, the calippic, each hand turning slowly in relation to the crank. Together they formed a coherent vision of the cosmos as a system of repeating patterns, an order beneath the surface of change. For a culture steeped in myth, this was a revelation of mathematics, proof that the gods moved not by whim alone, but by measure. Imagine the impression it must have left on those who saw it demonstrated. A visitor watches as the operator turns the crank. Slowly the dials shift. The moon advances across its phases, new to full and back again. A hand on the back dial approaches a mark, signaling an eclipse soon to come. The visitor leaves in awe, convinced that the heavens have been captured in a box. In that moment, knowledge became spectacle, and spectacle became belief. The Antikythera Mechanism as a calendar of the cosmos shows us that technology is not only about tools, but about vision. It was an attempt to hold time in the palm of the hand, to prove that the heavens could be known and predicted. It bridged myth and measurement, religion and science, offering certainty in a world where the will of the gods was feared. Though corroded and broken today, the logic of its gears still carries the message that even 2,000 years ago humanity sought not only to survive under the sky, but to master its rhythms, to turn the vastness of the cosmos into the steady turning of wheels. The Antikythera fragments sat in quiet display, their gears frozen in rust, and the question rose like a tide that no one could hold back. What was this machine really for? To modern eyes it seemed obvious that it was a device to model the heavens, but in its own age what purpose did it serve? Was it a teaching tool, a ritual object, an astronomical calculator, or something even more mysterious? The puzzle of its purpose has drawn generations of scholars into debate, each theory a reflection of how fragile the evidence is and how much imagination fills the gaps. One vision places the mechanism in the hands of philosophers and teachers. In the lecture halls of Rhodes or Alexandria, a learned man could have turned its crank to demonstrate the cycles of the heavens. His students would watch the dials move, the phases of the moon change, the prediction of an eclipse appear on the inscriptions. To those eager minds, it would be a revelation that knowledge was not merely words or numbers on papyrus, but could be embodied in bronze, a machine that made the cosmos tangible. In this interpretation, the mechanism was a teaching tool, a portable planetarium, proof that the Greeks not only thought deeply, but showed their ideas through devices. Another vision imagines the mechanism as a tool of navigation. Sailors on the Mediterranean lived and died by the stars. To have in one's possession a device that could predict celestial events might have offered confidence when crossing treacherous waters. The shipwreck in which the mechanism was found carried luxury goods, statues, and treasures, perhaps bound for a wealthy patron. Could the mechanism have been part of a navigator's toolkit, or a gift to one who commanded fleets? The idea is tempting, though the device's delicacy makes it unlikely that it was meant for the rough world of daily seafaring. Others see it as a symbol of prestige. In a society where knowledge of the heavens was linked with divine favor, possessing a machine that could predict the dance of the skies would mark its owner as extraordinary. A ruler could display it in court, impressing guests with the turning of gears that foretold eclipses. The mechanism could then be both science and spectacle, a marvel designed not only to calculate but to inspire awe, a fusion of accuracy and artistry intended to glorify its patron. Still, another theory connects the mechanism to ritual and religion. The ancients did not separate the sacred from the scientific as we do today. Eclipses were omens, planetary alignments carried meaning, and festivals had to be timed with the heavens. A device that predicted these events would not only be useful, it would be sacred. The inscriptions that mention games and cycles may reflect more than calculation. They may reflect the rhythm of life shaped by divine will. In this light, the mechanism becomes a liturgical calendar, an object used to ensure that rituals harmonized with the cosmos. The puzzle of purpose remains unresolved because the evidence is fragmentary. We know what the gears did, but not who exactly used them or why. The inscriptions give hints, but many are damaged or missing. The context of the shipwreck raises questions as well. Was the mechanism a common device carried among many, or a unique masterpiece destined for a wealthy collector? Was it an heirloom already old when it sank, or a new creation being transported to its owner? Each possibility carries a different story of purpose, yet all converge on the same truth. The mechanism mattered. It was not scrap, it was not trivial. It was built with skill and knowledge that demanded respect. In pondering its purpose, we confront our own assumptions about the past. We imagine ancient people as distant and limited, yet here is a device that defies such simplicity. Whether as teaching tool, prestige object, or ritual calendar, it demonstrates that the ancients valued precision, prediction, and the power to grasp time itself. The machine's purpose may never be narrowed to a single answer, but its existence ensures that we cannot underestimate the world that produced it. The Antikythera Mechanism continues to turn, not in bronze, but in our minds, reminding us that purpose is not always about utility alone. Sometimes it is about wonder, belief, and the desire to hold the cosmos in our hands. The wreck that yielded the Antikythera Mechanism was not a modest vessel, but a ship heavy with treasures, a floating palace of marble, bronze, and luxury that met its end in the restless waters of the Aegean. When divers first descended, they were stunned not only by the statues strewn across the seabed, but also by the sheer abundance of cargo. There were likenesses of gods and heroes, bronze figures whose eyes once shone with inlays of glass, fragments of furniture plated with ivory, amphorae packed with wine and oil, and ornaments crafted for the wealthy of the Roman world. This was not the cargo of a simple trader. It was the wealth of an elite, destined perhaps for Rome itself, where Greek artistry was prized as the pinnacle of culture. Amid these treasures, the mechanism was a strange companion. It lacked the obvious beauty of a statue or the immediate value of wine. Yet it rested among them, a sign that its worth was recognized by someone who chose to transport it alongside masterpieces. The question of who owned this ship lingers like a shadow. Some believe it may have been carrying goods for a powerful Roman general or noble, others that it belonged to merchants supplying the appetites of the rich. The truth is lost, but what remains clear is that the ship bore the finest that Greece could offer, and among that finery was the mysterious device. The secrets of the shipwreck tell us much about the world in which the mechanism was made. This was an age of cultural exchange, where Greek knowledge and art flowed into Roman hands, shaping an empire. The sea was both highway and graveyard, carrying treasures across waters that could turn hostile without warning. The Antikythera ship, laden with marble statues and delicate bronzes, may have been caught in a storm, its heavy cargo dragging it down. In that sudden violence, the mechanism was sealed in its watery tomb, spared from the looting and melting that claimed so many other works of metal. Ironically, it was destruction that preserved it. Divers who retrieved the statues could only marvel at their scale and weight, dragging them up with primitive suits and pumps, risking their lives with each descent. They could not have known that the small corroded object among them would eclipse the glory of marble gods. For historians, the shipwreck became a window into the trade networks of the Mediterranean, showing the movement of goods and culture. For scientists, it became the unlikely vault that preserved a single machine of unparalleled ingenuity. Without this wreck, without this catastrophe, the Antikythera Mechanism would never have survived. The shipwreck secrets extend beyond the mechanism. Coins found among the debris help to date the sinking, pointing to the 1st century before the Common Era. Other artifacts suggest connections between Rhodes, a hub of astronomical study, and the broader world of Hellenistic science. It is tempting to imagine that the mechanism itself may have been constructed on Rhodes, home to Hipparchus, the great astronomer whose work on lunar theory seems inscribed in its gears. If so, then the ship carried not just art and wine, but the distilled genius of an entire city devoted to understanding the sky. What else lies buried in the silt around the wreck, we cannot know. Even today, divers and archaeologists continue to explore the site, uncovering fragments missed in earlier expeditions. Each discovery deepens the story, weaving the mechanism into the broader fabric of ancient trade, art, and science. The sea guards its secrets fiercely, but sometimes it allows a glimpse, a fragment, a reminder of what was lost. The Antikythera shipwreck is more than the grave of a vessel. It is the unlikely library that delivered to us a single book of metal, a machine that rewrote history. Its statues remind us of the grandeur of Greek art, its amphorae of daily commerce, its wreckage of the perils of the sea. But its greatest gift is the corroded device that lay unnoticed for so long, waiting for patient eyes to see it for what it was. In the silence of the deep, the ship kept its secret, and in revealing it, forced us to reconsider the true breadth of ancient knowledge. The Antikythera Mechanism is often called a miracle of survival, for without the accident of its preservation on the seafloor, it would never have reached us. Yet, its very existence points to something more troubling, the reality that entire branches of knowledge can vanish. The Greeks did not invent such a device in isolation, with no precedent and no successors. To craft gears of such precision requires practice, tradition, and transmission of skill. And yet, aside from this one broken survivor, history offers us nothing. The line of technology that created it seems to have been cut short, forgotten, swallowed by silence. When modern engineers first studied the mechanism, they were struck not only by its complexity, but by the absence of context. Where were the other devices? Where were the workshops filled with bronze wheels and artisans cutting tiny teeth into metal? Where were the treatises describing their construction? All are missing. It is as though someone lit a bright torch in antiquity and then snuffed it out, leaving only smoke and ashes. The forgotten technology embodied in the mechanism is a reminder that progress is not a ladder we climb steadily, but a fragile network that can collapse if connections are broken. War is often blamed. The conquest of Greece by Rome brought upheaval. Libraries burned, cities were sacked, and artisans were enslaved or killed. Knowledge that had accumulated over centuries could vanish in a single season of violence. The delicate tradition of gear-making may have perished with its masters, their skills unrecorded, their tools melted down. Even if a few devices survived, they might have been destroyed in the melting pots that turned bronze into coin or weapon. The ravages of time are cruel enough, but the will of men hastened the erasure. Another explanation lies in the priorities of culture. The Romans admired Greek art and literature, but had little use for speculative machines. They built aqueducts and roads, weapons and arenas, practical monuments to empire, but devices that predicted eclipses may have seemed curiosities with no value to soldiers or governors. Without patronage, without demand, the knowledge withered. A technology, no matter how brilliant, survives only if it serves the needs of society. The Antikythera Mechanism may have been admired in its time, but admiration was not enough to keep its tradition alive. The forgotten technology is also evident in other places. Roman concrete, whose durability still outlasts our modern formulas, was lost for centuries until scientists tried to replicate it. Damascus steel, legendary for its strength and sharpness, vanished when the techniques of its forging disappeared. The blue pigment of the Maya, resistant to fading even after centuries, is another example of knowledge once known and then forgotten. The Antikythera Mechanism belongs to this gallery of lost arts, but it is perhaps the most haunting because of its mechanical nature. It suggests a pathway toward machines that could have transformed the ancient world, a pathway abandoned and erased. Imagine if the technology had survived, if the tradition of gearing had continued through the Roman era. By the Middle Ages, Europe might have inherited mechanical knowledge centuries ahead of its actual timeline. The Industrial Revolution could have dawned far earlier. The world we know might have been utterly different. Instead, the tradition was forgotten, and when mechanical clocks appeared in the 13th century, they seemed new, though in truth they were a rediscovery of what had once been achieved. The Antikythera Mechanism forces us to confront how fragile human achievement is. We assume that once knowledge is discovered, it will accumulate endlessly, but history shows otherwise. Knowledge can be lost, buried, dismissed, or destroyed. The mechanism's rusted gears are not only a triumph, they are a warning. They tell us that even the brightest sparks can fade, that civilizations can forget, and that progress is not guaranteed. As we look upon the fragments today, we see both the brilliance of their makers and the silence that followed them. The forgotten technology of the Antikythera Mechanism is not only about what it achieved, but about what was lost when its tradition died. It is the absence between the gears, the hollow where history should have been, a reminder that we too live in a world where knowledge can be fragile, where what we take for granted may vanish in the tide of time. Among the many names that shine in the history of ancient thought, one echoes whenever the Antikythera Mechanism is discussed, the name of Archimedes. He lived in the 3rd century before the Common Era in the city of Syracuse, and he was famed not only as a mathematician, but as an inventor, an engineer whose machines defended his city, and whose ideas stretched into the realms of infinity. To invoke his name in connection with the mechanism is to suggest that the brilliance behind the gears may have drawn from the same tradition that produced one of the greatest minds of antiquity. Archimedes was said to have built devices that modeled the heavens. Writers of later generations described spheres that turned to show the motions of the sun, the moon, and the planets. Cicero himself wrote of such a machine, marveling that when it was rotated, it displayed the same eclipses that occur in the sky. The resemblance to the Antikythera Mechanism is striking, for here too we find a device that embodied celestial cycles in bronze. Could the mechanism be a descendant of Archimedes' lost creations, a survival of a tradition passed through students and artisans, carried across the centuries until it sank beneath the Aegean waves? The idea is tempting, though certainty escapes us. Archimedes' own devices have not survived, and our knowledge of them rests on descriptions in texts that mix admiration with myth. Yet, the Antikythera Mechanism proves that such machines were not fantasy. They were possible, they were real, and at least one was built. If Archimedes was capable of constructing spheres and mechanisms, then perhaps his genius seeded a lineage of craftsmen who continued his work. Rhodes, where many scholars place the origin of the Antikythera Mechanism, was a center of astronomical learning connected with the legacy of Hipparchus, another figure whose theories seem written into the gears. Between Hipparchus and Archimedes, we glimpse a chain of thought and craft that could have birthed the device. To imagine Archimedes' influence is to picture workshops where mathematics met metallurgy. A philosopher calculates the ratios of lunar cycles. An artisan shapes bronze into fine teeth. Together they merge theory and craft. Archimedes may have been the first to dream of such fusion, and others may have carried the dream forward. The mechanism itself, though built centuries after his death, bears the stamp of minds who shared his spirit, daring to embody the cosmos in a machine. Echoes of Archimedes linger in the very questions the mechanism raises. It challenges our belief that knowledge flows only forward, that genius once found is never lost. Archimedes was killed during the Roman conquest of Syracuse, his city sacked, his machines destroyed. How much of his work vanished in that violence? How many inventions perished with him? Their details never recorded, their traditions never continued. The Antikythera Mechanism may be the lone survivor of a wider world of mechanical marvels, a fragment that drifted down the centuries to reach us. The connection is haunting. If Archimedes built devices like the mechanism, then we must accept that the ancients once stood at the threshold of mechanical science, only to see it slip away. The light of genius flared, then darkness followed, and it would take more than 1,000 years for humanity to stumble back upon the same path. The fragments of bronze that divers raised in 1901 may carry within them the ghost of Archimedes' lost legacy, an echo of his vision whispered through rust and broken gears. Whether or not the mechanism can be traced directly to him, its existence proves that his world was capable of such wonders. The gears speak of a tradition where philosophy, astronomy, and engineering were not separate disciplines but parts of one pursuit, the quest to understand and to shape the cosmos. In that sense, Archimedes lives on in the Antikythera Mechanism, not in name but in spirit, a presence felt whenever the fragments are studied, a reminder that the past is filled with echoes that refuse to fade. From the moment humans first picked up a stone and struck it against another to shape a tool, a line of continuity began, a thread that would stretch from crude edges to the hidden gears of the Antikythera Mechanism. The journey from stone to stars is not only the story of technology, it is the story of how curiosity drives us to transform the world around us. Each chipped flint, each carved bone, each spark of fire lit in the dark was a step toward the day when bronze teeth would mimic the rhythms of the heavens. In the earliest ages, our ancestors looked to the sky with awe. They had no machines, no written records, only memory and oral tradition. Yet they noticed that the moon grew and shrank, that the seasons repeated, that certain stars returned at the same time each year. From these observations, they built calendars marked on bones and painted on cave walls. To mark time was to tame it, and in taming time, they laid the groundwork for the science that would one day flow into metal gears. When villages grew into cities, the need for more precise reckonings of time deepened. Farmers required planting schedules, priests required dates for rituals, rulers required calendars to organize their domains. The sky became the great ledger, and to read it was to command power. From Mesopotamia to Egypt, from the valleys of the Indus to the plains of China, astronomer priests tracked the heavens, noting eclipses, recording planetary wanderings, devising ways to predict cycles. Out of this ancient pursuit of order, the Greek world inherited a tradition of careful watching and mathematical reckoning. The Antikythera Mechanism is the heir to those millennia of watching. Its gears are the culmination of generations who scratched records on clay tablets, who aligned temples with solstices, who built monuments to the stars. Each tooth of bronze carries within it the echo of stone circles raised on windswept plains and the silent calculations of scribes who studied the heavens by torchlight. The leap from stone to bronze was not sudden, but patient. The accumulation of countless observations and insights woven together by time. Consider how extraordinary it is that by the 2nd century before the Common Era, artisans could take this inherited knowledge and embody it in a machine. The transition from naked eye observation to mechanical modeling is as profound as the leap from flint knives to steel blades. It represents a shift from seeing the world to recreating it, from observing cycles to embodying them in wheels and dials. The Antikythera Mechanism is more than an artifact of Greek ingenuity. It is the flowering of human persistence across ages. The device reminds us that technology does not erase what came before, it builds upon it. The stone that struck sparks of fire is kin to the bronze gear that turned to mark an eclipse. The continuity is not in the material, but in the desire to know, to predict, to grasp the patterns hidden in nature. From the hunter gazing at the stars to find his way home, to the philosopher calculating the orbit of the moon, to the craftsman cutting fine teeth into bronze, the same spirit binds them. The story from stone to stars is also a reminder of fragility. Just as the knowledge of fire could be lost to a forgotten tribe, so too the knowledge of gears could be lost to a fallen civilization. The Antikythera Mechanism proves that brilliance can rise, but it also shows that brilliance can vanish. The chain is not unbreakable. We must imagine how many inventions were born, used, and then forgotten, their traces buried, their memory gone. The device we hold today is a rare survivor, a spark carried across millennia, telling us that the journey from stone to stars was real, and that it could have gone further had history been kinder. Looking upon its fragments, we do not only see Greek artisanship, we see the entire arc of human striving. We see the first hand that picked up stone, the first eye that followed the moon across the sky, the first mind that wondered if the universe could be measured. The Antikythera Mechanism is the embodiment of that longing, a machine that connects us to the deep past and to the eternal question of what lies beyond. From stone to stars, the path was carved by human hands, and in the broken gears of bronze we glimpse both how far we have come and how much we have lost. For decades after its recovery, the corroded fragments of the Antikythera Mechanism rested in museum cases, puzzling yet overlooked, their importance veiled by rust. The early 20th century was not ready to see them for what they were. Archaeology was still young, technology studies still primitive, and the fragments seemed too strange to fit into the accepted story of history. Yet curiosity lingered. Every now and then a scholar would peer at the fragments, sketch their outlines, wonder at the faint inscriptions, and then set them aside again, unable to penetrate their secret. The true rediscovery of the mechanism came slowly, like the lifting of a fog, across decades of effort and advances in science. By the middle of the century, attention returned to the fragments with greater seriousness. In 1951, the British historian Derek de Solla Price began a detailed study determined to understand the gears. He combined historical knowledge with the eye of a scientist, arguing that the mechanism was an astronomical calculator, a machine capable of predicting celestial events. His work drew skepticism, for the idea seemed too bold, but his conviction planted the seed of modern research. He published meticulous papers, sketched possible reconstructions, and proclaimed that the fragments represented a level of technology no one had suspected in antiquity. Slowly, the world began to listen. The real breakthrough came with technology that allowed the hidden interiors of the fragments to be seen without destroying them. X-ray imaging revealed layers of gears embedded within the corroded bronze, patterns invisible to the naked eye. Later, advanced scans using computerized tomography produced three-dimensional models, allowing researchers to peer inside and trace the connections of each wheel. What had once seemed a handful of broken lumps blossomed into a mechanical architecture of astonishing intricacy. The rediscovery was not merely intellectual, it was visual, as images showed the hidden gears gleaming like ghosts of the past. Inscriptions, too, came to life under new techniques. Digital imaging enhanced the faint scratches of Greek letters, revealing texts that described eclipses, cycles, and even references to athletic games. These words confirmed what the gears had hinted, that the device was built to map the heavens with accuracy and to serve as a calendar of human life tied to celestial order. The rediscovery was not only of metal, but of meaning. The recognition that the ancients had crafted a machine both scientific and cultural, bridging the sky and society. As reconstructions multiplied, the mechanism took on shape again. Models were built in brass and wood, showing how the original may have appeared when whole. Cranks turned, dials moved, pointers traced the courses of the moon and sun. What had once been rested silence became living motion once more. To see these reconstructions is to feel a thrill, as though a ghost machine has been raised from the seabed, reborn to tell its story. The rediscovery in modern times was also a rediscovery of humility. For generations, we had believed that complex machines were the inheritance of the modern world, born of Renaissance and Enlightenment. The mechanism proved otherwise. It showed that brilliance had shone before, that knowledge had flowered and then vanished, leaving only a single survivor to contradict our assumptions. It reminded us that the past is not simple, that human ingenuity is older and deeper than we like to think. Today, the mechanism is studied by teams of scientists across disciplines, from astronomy to engineering, from philology to computer modeling. Each discovery adds a piece to the puzzle, yet the whole remains elusive. We know far more than we did a century ago, but questions linger. Was it unique or one of many? Who exactly built it? How was the tradition lost? The rediscovery is ongoing, not finished, a conversation between past and present, carried on through corroded bronze. The story of its modern rediscovery tells us as much about ourselves as about the ancients. It shows our willingness to doubt, our slowness to accept what challenges our assumptions, and our eventual awe when evidence forces us to listen. The Antikythera Mechanism lay silent for 2,000 years, but once we had the tools to see and the patience to study, it spoke again. Its voice reminds us that history is never closed, that the past can rise from the sea to rewrite what we thought we knew. When the fragments of the Antikythera Mechanism were first raised from the sea, they were little more than lumps of rusted bronze. For decades, they sat in drawers and display cases, silent and broken, provoking speculation, but yielding no clarity. Yet, in the modern age, when technology allowed us to peer inside and reconstruct what time had destroyed, the machine began to live again. Out of corrosion and mystery came rebirth. The Antikythera Mechanism was reborn not as a single artifact, but as a series of reconstructions, each an attempt to capture what the original once accomplished. The earliest reconstructions were tentative, built with limited data and much imagination. Scholars sketched possible layouts of gears, craftsmen cut brass wheels and mounted them in wooden frames, and each attempt produced a device that moved, turned, and hinted at the lost whole. Some models were crude, others elegant, but all carried the same purpose: to bring the silent fragments back to motion. These efforts were acts of devotion as much as of science, attempts to feel what it might have been like to stand before the machine in its prime and watch the cosmos unfold upon its dials. As scanning technologies improved, the reconstructions grew more precise. Tomographic images revealed hidden gears and inscriptions that earlier generations had missed. Computer models mapped the gear trains in 3 dimensions, showing how they meshed, how rotations transmitted, how ratios matched the cycles of the heavens. Out of these digital blueprints, new physical models were built, gleaming brass mechanisms enclosed in wooden cases, their cranks smooth to turn, their dials etched with Greek letters. For the first time in 2,000 years, the mechanism lived again, not in fragments, but in working form. To see one of these reconstructions in motion is to glimpse a bridge between worlds. As the crank turns, gears spin, dials move, and the sun and moon trace their paths across the zodiac. The back dials record the Metonic and Saros cycles, predicting eclipses, aligning calendars. What was once an enigma of rust becomes a performance of order, a machine that shows time as rhythm and pattern. The reborn mechanism does more than inform, it enchants, reminding us that knowledge can be beautiful and that beauty can serve knowledge. The rebirth of the mechanism is also symbolic. It represents our refusal to let the past remain silent. With patience, with technology, with imagination, we coaxed meaning from ruin. We built again what had been lost, not perfectly, not completely, but enough to hear the voice of its makers. Each reconstruction is both a scientific instrument and a work of art, a collaboration across centuries between the ancients who first cut the gears and the moderns who refused to let them stay forgotten. Reborn, the Antikythera Mechanism has traveled far. Replicas are displayed in museums, studied in laboratories, even celebrated in documentaries and exhibitions. It has inspired engineers and artists, historians and dreamers. Its rebirth has given it a second life, one that may last longer than its first. In this new life, it is no longer a tool for predicting eclipses. It is a tool for reminding humanity of its own capacity for genius, for loss, and for rediscovery. The machine reborn does not erase the mystery. We still do not know who built the original, or how many existed, or why the tradition vanished. But we know enough to marvel. The rebirth allows us to see what was possible, to feel the touch of minds long gone, to connect across millennia through the turning of wheels. In the smooth motion of brass replicas, we hear the echo of ancient artisans, and in that echo, the silence of centuries is broken. From the moment the gears of the Antikythera Mechanism were first recognized, debate has surrounded it like a storm that will not pass. The device is too advanced for its time, too singular in its survival, too strange to fit easily into the story of history. Scholars, engineers, and dreamers have argued over its meaning, each camp presenting explanations that reflect not only evidence but also the assumptions they bring to the past. The controversies and debates that swirl around the mechanism are part of its power, for they reveal as much about us as they do about the ancients who built it. Some argue that the mechanism was a unique masterpiece, the work of a solitary genius, or a small circle of craftsmen whose knowledge was not widely shared. In this view, the mechanism is an accident of brilliance, a spark that flared and then was extinguished when its makers died or their workshop fell silent. The absence of other examples is explained by rarity. Perhaps only a handful were ever built, destined for the wealthy, carried as luxuries rather than tools. This theory preserves the established timeline of technological progress, but it leaves us haunted by the thought of lost genius that flickered for a moment and then vanished. Others argue for a broader tradition. They see the mechanism not as an anomaly, but as evidence that advanced gearwork was known, practiced, and perhaps common in certain circles. The lack of surviving devices is blamed on the cruelty of time. Bronze was melted for coin, wood cases rotted, shipwrecks destroyed their cargoes. If dozens or even hundreds once existed, most could easily have perished. In this interpretation, the Antikythera Mechanism is not the exception, but the lone survivor of a lost lineage of machines. If true, then our picture of ancient technology must be redrawn, recognizing that the ancients achieved far more than we admit. The debate stretches into questions of purpose as well. Was it a teaching device, a tool for astronomers, a calendar for priests, or a symbol of prestige for rulers? Each possibility carries weight, and each reshapes our understanding of the society that produced it. The inscriptions suggest astronomical prediction, yet their mention of athletic games implies cultural use. Was the mechanism practical, ritual, or symbolic? The fragments cannot answer definitively, so the debate continues, and in that continuation, the mystery deepens. Beyond the halls of academia, more speculative voices have joined the debate. Some see in the mechanism proof of lost civilizations, cultures advanced beyond our recognition that vanished without record. Others whisper of influences from beyond the earth, ancient visitors whose knowledge seeded human invention. These ideas are not supported by evidence, yet their persistence shows how powerful the mechanism's mystery is. When faced with a device that seems out of place, the human mind reaches for explanations, from careful scholarship to wild imagination. The mechanism thrives in that space between certainty and wonder. The controversies are not confined to the past. Even today, scholars disagree about how many gears the original held, how complete the surviving fragments are, and exactly what functions the device performed. Reconstructions differ in detail, each offering a slightly different vision of the whole. These disagreements are not failures, but reflections of the fragmentary nature of the evidence. The mechanism resists final answers, insisting that we live with uncertainty. The debates remind us that history is not fixed. It is an ongoing conversation shaped by discovery, interpretation, and imagination. The Antikythera Mechanism challenges us to reconsider what we think we know, to accept that the ancients may have stood closer to us in brilliance than we once believed. Whether a singular marvel or a representative of a lost tradition, whether a tool or a treasure, it refuses to be simple. The controversies and debates are not distractions from its meaning. They are its meaning. They keep the mechanism alive, turning in our minds as its gears once turned in bronze. They ensure that we do not dismiss the past as primitive or assume that progress is inevitable. In the silence of the fragments, we hear many voices, some cautious, some bold, all seeking to explain how such a thing could exist. The mechanism endures not only as a machine, but as a question, and the debates it inspires are themselves a testament to its power. Across the ruins of many civilizations, there are whispers of knowledge once held and then forgotten. The Antikythera Mechanism is not alone in this regard. It stands among a family of lost technologies, creations of brilliance that emerged in their time and then slipped into obscurity, leaving behind only fragments, legends, or ruins that resist full understanding. To place the mechanism in this broader context is to see that the forgetting of knowledge is not rare but recurring, a pattern woven through the fabric of human history. The Romans built with a concrete whose durability outlasts our own. Structures like aqueducts, harbors, and domes still stand after 2,000 years. Their mortars strengthened by a recipe modern science has only recently begun to rediscover. Yet, when the empire fell, the secret of that mixture was lost. Centuries of builders worked with weaker formulas, never able to replicate what Roman engineers once knew. The concrete is a reminder that knowledge is not always cumulative. It can vanish, leaving later generations to marvel at ruins they cannot fully explain. From the forges of the medieval world came Damascus steel, blades of legendary sharpness and resilience. The technique that produced them relied on subtle patterns of metallurgy, folding and forging with a precision that gave swords both strength and beauty. Travelers wrote of blades that could slice a feather in midair or bend without breaking. But by the 17th century, the craft had disappeared, the recipe forgotten, the forges gone cold. Today, metallurgists can approximate the results, but admit that the exact methods remain mysterious. Damascus steel stands as another echo of lost mastery. In the temples of the Maya, a pigment of extraordinary resilience was created, a blue so vivid and enduring that it still shines after centuries exposed to jungle and weather. The recipe combined natural clays with organic dyes in a way that resisted decay. Yet, the technique vanished with the collapse of Maya civilization. Only in modern laboratories has the secret been partially revealed, and even now the cultural meaning behind its creation is only guessed at. The blue pigment is more than chemistry, it is a lost expression of identity and spirit. Even in warfare, the ancients wielded knowledge that vanished. Greek fire, the weapon of Byzantium, could burn on water, terrorizing enemies who faced flames that could not be quenched. Chronicles describe it with awe, yet the recipe was guarded so closely that when the empire fell, the secret fell with it. Modern scientists debate its composition, but cannot replicate it with certainty. Like the Antikythera Mechanism, it is a ghost of ingenuity that haunts us with its silence. These examples remind us that the Antikythera Mechanism is part of a larger story. Civilizations rise, achieve, and then collapse, and with them vanish techniques, recipes, devices, and discoveries. The fragility of human memory means that brilliance can flare and fade, leaving us with ruins whose secrets we struggle to decode. The mechanism's gears are kin to Roman concrete, Damascus steel, Maya blue, and Greek fire. Each tells us that progress is not inevitable, that knowledge must be preserved or it will be lost. The persistence of these fragments across cultures shows how universal the pattern is. In every age, humans sought to master their world, to create technologies that seem miraculous, to harness nature with art and science. Yet, in every age, those achievements were vulnerable to war, neglect, disaster, and disinterest. What survives is often accidental, a ruin spared by chance, a fragment preserved by burial, a machine saved by a shipwreck. Without the sea's embrace, the Antikythera Mechanism would have perished as surely as the recipe for Greek fire. When we place the mechanism within this gallery of forgotten technologies, it gains a deeper meaning. It is not an isolated miracle, but a witness to a cycle. Knowledge is discovered, applied, admired, and then lost, only to be rediscovered centuries later by people who marvel as though it were new. The gears of Antikythera remind us of the blades of Damascus, the stones of Roman aqueducts, the pigments of Maya temples, and the fire of Byzantium. They are all voices from the past, whispering that humanity has walked farther before than we remember. To study these lost technologies is to feel humility. We live in an age of great machines and global communication, yet our ancestors too reached heights that surprise us. The Antikythera Mechanism among its companions shows that we are not the first to dream boldly, not the first to grasp the patterns of the universe, and not immune to the forgetting that has undone so many before us. In its corroded gears we hear a warning that knowledge not cherished can vanish, and that the path from brilliance to silence is shorter than we think. After the ship sank and the Antikythera Mechanism slipped into its long sleep beneath the sea, silence followed. Not just the silence of the ocean floor, but the silence of centuries in which no device like it was ever built again. No tradition of gearwork survived, no manuals were copied, no apprentices carried on the craft. The silence of centuries is as much a part of the story as the brilliance of the machine itself, for it reminds us how fragile knowledge can be when the thread of continuity is cut. When Rome absorbed Greece, it inherited art, literature, and philosophy, but it did not inherit the delicate science of celestial machines. The Romans cared for roads, aqueducts, and weapons, for monuments of power and utility. They admired Greek statues, but had little use for gear trains that predicted eclipses. In their world, practicality outweighed curiosity, and the fragile line of mechanical astronomy found no place to thrive. Without patrons to commission, without workshops to practice, the craft withered. Centuries passed, and as empires fell, libraries burned, and artisans were scattered or enslaved, the memory of such devices faded. By the Middle Ages in Europe, the knowledge of gearing had to be rediscovered from scratch. When mechanical clocks appeared in the 13th century, they seemed like miracles of ingenuity, yet they were, in truth, echoes of something already achieved 1,000 years earlier. The silence had lasted so long that no one remembered the earlier song. This long absence shapes the way we think of history. We like to imagine progress as steady, a climb from darkness to light, but the silence of centuries shows that progress can falter, collapse, and be forgotten. There is nothing inevitable about the survival of knowledge. It depends on people, on culture, on need, and on chance. The Antikythera Mechanism did not fail because it was flawed. It failed because history was merciless. In that silence, legends may have carried faint echoes. Writers like Cicero described machines of Archimedes that displayed the motions of the heavens. Perhaps they had seen or heard of devices like the Antikythera Mechanism. Perhaps they described them with awe. And then their words were read by later generations who no longer knew such things were possible. The gap between description and practice widened until it was unbridgeable, and the silence deepened. We imagine the workshops gone quiet, the artisans dead, their tools melted down, their knowledge perishing unrecorded. Perhaps a few devices survived for a time in private collections, marvels admired by nobles until they too crumbled or were lost. Each generation that passed without building another was another layer of silence, another step away from the possibility of preservation. By the time the wreck was discovered in 1901, 2,000 years of silence had already sealed its mystery. The silence of centuries is what makes the mechanism so haunting. It is not only what it shows us, but what it hides. It reveals brilliance, but also a void, a dark gulf in which continuity was broken. The corroded gears are like voices calling across a canyon of time, reminding us that knowledge is perishable, that what seems eternal may last only as long as it is practiced, taught, and valued. When we study the Antikythera Mechanism today, we must confront that silence as part of its story. The centuries when no gears turned, no dials marked eclipses, no hands traced the zodiac, are as significant as the years when the machine was alive. In that silence, we see the vulnerability of human achievement. We see how easily the thread can be severed. And we see that rediscovery, however thrilling, cannot undo what was lost. The silence of centuries teaches us humility. It warns us that even in our age, knowledge we consider secure could vanish if forgotten, if neglected, if destroyed. The mechanism's long slumber is a mirror of our own fragility. It tells us that brilliance without continuity is a fleeting spark, and that once extinguished, it may take millennia before the light is kindled again. There are times when evidence alone cannot quiet the imagination, and the Antikythera Mechanism is one of those times. The fragments sit behind glass, their gears silent, their purpose mostly understood, yet the mind drifts beyond the limits of science into the realm of speculation. Theories rise that reach past scholarship, theories beyond science, born of wonder and of the human refusal to accept simple answers when confronted with something so far ahead of its age. Some propose that the mechanism is proof of a lost civilization, a culture that rose before Greece, achieved great heights of knowledge, and then fell into obscurity, leaving behind only whispers. The device becomes a relic of Atlantis, or of some forgotten people whose mastery of gears and cycles has vanished from history. In this view, the mechanism is not the work of isolated genius, but the survivor of a lineage older than we know, a clue that our timeline of progress is incomplete, perhaps even deeply flawed. Others reach further still, imagining visitors not of this earth. Ancient astronauts, they suggest, may have guided the hands that cut the gears, offering fragments of their knowledge to humanity before disappearing into the stars. The precision of the mechanism, its apparent anachronism, becomes evidence not of Greek ingenuity, but of extraterrestrial influence. Such theories rest not on proof, but on the allure of mystery, on the desire to see in the device a message from beyond our world. Even among more cautious minds, the mechanism sparks alternative speculations. Could it have been built using techniques long thought impossible, methods of cutting gears or casting bronze that we have not rediscovered? Could it imply that ancient craftsmen possessed machine tools we have never found, that their workshops held devices more advanced than the fragments suggest? These ideas stretch the imagination, but remind us that much of history remains hidden, buried, or erased. There are also theories that bend time itself. Some storytellers imagine the mechanism as an object out of place, not because of lost knowledge, but because it does not belong to its era at all. A machine from the future, carried back through time by accident or design, stranded in antiquity and sunk with its ship. Such tales belong to fiction, yet they reveal the depth of fascination the mechanism commands. It feels, to some, less like an artifact of the past and more like an intruder from another age. Science resists such leaps, insisting on evidence and reason. Yet the persistence of theories beyond science is part of the mechanism's power. It is not only a device of bronze, but a mirror of our imagination. Faced with its mystery, we are tempted to dream. We dream of civilizations forgotten, of visitors from the stars, of lost workshops and hidden lineages, of time bending in ways we cannot explain. The mechanism invites these dreams because it stands at the boundary of what we know and what we cannot. In the end, whether these theories are dismissed as fantasy or entertained as possibility, they reveal the human hunger for wonder. The Antikythera Mechanism does not need to be from Atlantis or from the stars to be miraculous. It is enough that it was built by human hands more than 2,000 years ago, enough that it survived the sea to remind us of forgotten brilliance. Yet the theories beyond science remain, whispering in the background, adding layers of myth to a machine already steeped in mystery. The gears no longer turn, but the imagination does, spinning stories of lost worlds and impossible knowledge. In that sense, the mechanism is both artifact and legend, both machine and myth. It stands between science and speculation, drawing us deeper into the mystery of what it means to remember, to forget, and to dream. The Antikythera Mechanism has always belonged to two worlds, the world of science and the world of story. As soon as its gears were recognized, it stepped out of obscurity and into legend. Machines have power, not only in what they do, but in what they symbolize. And this one, broken and corroded, has become a canvas upon which countless myths are painted. The machine and myth are inseparable, each feeding the other, each ensuring that the mechanism will never again be merely a lump of bronze. In the ancient world, machines that imitated the heavens were themselves the stuff of myth. Writers spoke of Archimedes' celestial sphere, a contrivance so wondrous that it seemed almost divine. Cicero described it with reverence, marveling that a device of human making could reproduce the motions of the sky. The Antikythera Mechanism, though hidden for centuries, fits seamlessly into this tradition. It is the reality behind the legends, the proof that such stories were not pure invention. Yet, because the original context was lost, the mechanism itself has now become mythic, an object around which new tales are woven. In modern culture, the mechanism has appeared in novels, films, and games. It is portrayed as a treasure of Atlantis, as a key to time travel, as a weapon of secret power coveted by empires. Documentaries speak of it in hushed tones, emphasizing its enigma, while artists render it as a talisman of forgotten wisdom. For the public, it has become more than a device that calculated eclipses. It has become a symbol of mystery itself, a reminder that the past holds secrets waiting to be revealed. The myths are not only entertainment, they reflect a deep human need to see the past as more than ordinary. The broken gears suggest hidden knowledge, and so we imagine lost civilizations or divine intervention. The corrosion hides detail, and so we fill the gaps with stories. The very incompleteness of the mechanism makes it fertile ground for myth-making. Unlike a modern machine which is fully explained, the Antikythera Mechanism resists closure. It demands interpretation, and in that demand, myth thrives. In some tellings, the mechanism is a warning, a relic that shows how far we once came and how easily it was lost. In others, it is a promise, proof that human potential is boundless, that even 2,000 years ago we reached for the stars. Sometimes it is cast as a weapon, a secret too powerful for its age. Sometimes it is a guide, a tool meant to connect humanity to the order of the cosmos. Each myth reflects the fears and hopes of those who tell it, shaping the machine into whatever story they need. The intertwining of machine and myth is not unique to Antikythera, but here it is especially powerful. Because so little survives, the imagination rushes to complete the picture. Because it is so advanced, we cannot resist seeing it as extraordinary. The result is a relic that lives in two dimensions, as a real device studied with scanners and mathematics, and as a mythical object that inspires awe and speculation. Both dimensions are true in their own way. The mechanism is as real as the fragments in the museum, and as mythic as the stories that surround it. This fusion may ensure its immortality. Machines that serve their purpose often fade into obscurity once replaced, but machines that cross into myth endure. The Antikythera Mechanism is not only a chapter of history, but a legend, a symbol of lost knowledge, a story retold whenever humans wonder about the fragility of progress. It is both artifact and myth, a paradox that keeps it alive. The machine and myth together remind us that the past is not silent. It speaks through corroded metal, through broken gears, through stories whispered across generations. The Antikythera Mechanism speaks to us as science, but it also sings to us as myth, a chorus of voices that insists we listen not only with reason, but with imagination. Imagine for a moment that the Antikythera Mechanism had not vanished beneath the waves, that it had survived not as fragments, but as a living tradition. Imagine workshops in Rhodes or Alexandria, where apprentices learned to cut gears, where philosophers calculated ratios, where rulers commissioned machines that traced the heavens. If the device had never disappeared, history itself might have taken a different shape. The chapter we call progress could have been written centuries earlier, and the world as we know it might be unrecognizable. If the mechanism had endured, the art of precision gearing would have been preserved. By the time Rome expanded across the Mediterranean, such devices might have been common, carried not as singular treasures, but as tools of navigation, education, and ritual. Roman engineers, skilled in concrete and aqueducts, might have adopted and multiplied the craft, embedding mechanical calculation into their empire. Calendars could have been standardized with greater accuracy, eclipses predicted with certainty, planetary motions mapped with ease. The combination of Roman practicality and Greek ingenuity could have pushed technology centuries forward. Consider what this would mean for the Middle Ages. Instead of rediscovering mechanical clocks in the 13th century, Europe might have inherited machines far more advanced. Astronomical calculators could have guided scholars through the so-called dark centuries, ensuring continuity of knowledge rather than silence. Navigation could have been transformed. Sailors armed with mechanical models of the sky might have crossed oceans long before the 15th century. The age of exploration might have dawned in antiquity, altering the map of the world before our modern nations were even imagined. If the mechanism had never disappeared, the scientific revolution might have come far earlier. With the ability to model the cosmos mechanically, questions of motion, ratio, and law could have been pursued with a depth that our ancestors only reached in the 17th century. Galileo might not have seemed revolutionary but derivative, standing on a foundation built 1,000 years before. Newton's laws might have been discovered in Rome or Byzantium, the calculus of the heavens written in ink centuries before it was in reality. The Industrial Revolution itself might have erupted not in the 18th century, but in the ancient world, steam and steel transforming societies that still spoke Greek and Latin. Yet this speculation is tinged with unease. Would earlier mastery of machines have brought earlier wonders or earlier disasters? A world armed with industrial power in the time of empires that still practiced slavery and conquest might have been a harsher place. Gunpowder paired with gears could have birthed machines of war beyond imagination. The leap of technology does not guarantee a leap of morality. To imagine the mechanism surviving is to imagine both brighter and darker paths, futures where humanity reached the stars sooner or destroyed itself sooner. Still, the haunting truth remains: the disappearance of the mechanism delayed us. Its silence stretched the timeline of progress, forcing us to rediscover what we might have inherited. The gears remind us that knowledge is fragile, that civilization can stumble, that brilliance can be forgotten. If it had not been lost, we would not marvel at it today as an anomaly. We might instead take it for granted, one step among many on a road of unbroken ascent. Its survival as fragments forces us to feel the weight of what could have been. In the end, imagining a world where the Antikythera mechanism never disappeared is less about speculation and more about recognition. It shows us how much hinges on preservation, on continuity, on the fragile chain that carries ideas through time. We live in the world where the mechanism was lost, not the world where it endured, and that loss shaped everything. The gears that lie silent behind glass are not only relics of the past, they are windows into alternate histories, reminders of futures denied, whispers of a road not taken. Beneath the waters off the island of Antikythera, the wreck still rests, its timbers long decayed, its cargo scattered, its memory swallowed by the sea. Divers descend into the quiet depths and find marble faces staring from the silt, amphorae broken like eggshells, bronze statues half buried in sand. Among them lie the fragments of the mechanism, the shattered heart of a machine that once turned with the rhythm of the heavens. Though some pieces have been lifted into the light of museums, others may still sleep below, waiting in the shadows of the deep. The sea keeps its secrets, revealing them only reluctantly, only when chance and courage meet. When we gaze upon the fragments in their cases, we must remember that they are not whole. Somewhere in the darkness of the seabed, or perhaps lost forever to corrosion, are pieces that once completed the design. We hear whispers from the deep, hints of functions unknown, of dials and gears that may have told more than we can imagine. The silence of the ocean is filled with questions. Was the mechanism truly unique, or one of many? Were there greater machines, more complex, more ambitious, carried on other ships that never returned? What rests beneath the waves beyond the reach of our eyes? The sea has always been a graveyard of memory. For every wreck discovered, countless more remain untouched. The Antikythera mechanism may be only one survivor among many marvels drowned in storms and wars. Perhaps the Mediterranean floor is littered with the bones of other devices, their gears dissolved, their stories erased. The whispers remind us that what we know is shaped by what the sea has chosen to preserve. The ocean is both destroyer and archivist, a vast library where most books are locked shut, but once in a rare while, one is opened. Whispers from the deep also call us to humility. We live in an age of machines, satellites, and digital maps of the heavens, yet even we stand in awe of what was built 2,000 years ago. The fragments remind us that brilliance is not our monopoly, that the ancients too reached for the stars, that their minds were as restless and as daring as ours. The mechanism speaks not of aliens or miracles, but of humanity itself, of our endless desire to understand, to predict, to hold time and cosmos in our grasp. The sea kept it safe so that one day we might remember. And so we listen, in the clatter of reconstructed gears, in the careful lines of inscriptions revealed by scanners, in the stories told by scholars and dreamers alike. We hear the echoes of craftsmen long gone. Their voices rise like whispers from the deep, telling us that progress is fragile, that knowledge must be cherished, that the past holds wonders we have not yet rediscovered. The mechanism's fragments are rust and silence, but also music, a song of ingenuity that outlived its age. The story does not end in the museum or in the pages of research. It lingers in the imagination, in the questions that haunt us. What else lies beneath the waves? What other voices wait to be heard? The sea will not answer quickly. It whispers only in fragments, only in patience. But we know now that its depths hold treasures not of gold or jewels, but of knowledge, machines that can rewrite the story of humanity. The Antikythera Mechanism is one such whisper, carried across 2 millennia, broken but not silenced. It reminds us that the deep is not only water and darkness, but memory itself. As long as we listen, as long as we dive into the unknown, we may yet hear more whispers from the deep. Voices that will once again reshape our understanding of who we are and what we once achieved. In 1938, deep within the storerooms of the National Museum of Iraq, a German archaeologist named Wilhelm Koenig stumbled upon a clay jar that looked deceptively ordinary. It was small, rough to the eye, the kind of vessel one might expect to hold oil or wine. Yet inside this humble jar lay something that made him pause. There was a rolled sheet of copper, and inside it, a corroded iron rod sealed with bitumen. It did not belong to ritual pottery or common storage. It seemed like the pieces of a machine, a puzzle that had crossed the centuries to reach his hands. Koenig examined it carefully, and a thought flashed across his mind that would ignite decades of debate. What if this jar was not a jar at all, but a battery? A device capable of producing electricity 2,000 years before modern science claimed its discovery. The idea was outrageous, almost impossible, yet the components whispered of function. Pour in an acidic liquid, vinegar or lemon juice, and the jar might come alive with a faint charge. Could the ancients of Mesopotamia have harnessed power we thought belonged only to the modern world? The Baghdad Battery, as it would come to be called, is an artifact that refuses to sit quietly in the past. To some, it is evidence of forgotten technology, proof that our ancestors reached further than we imagine. To others, it is nothing more than a jar misinterpreted, its mystery born of wishful thinking. But in its silence, in its corroded metal and cracked clay, it stirs a question that refuses to fade. If electricity was known in the ancient world, what else have we lost? Before we dive into the story of clay and copper, of science and myth, I invite you to join me on this journey. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the secrets hidden in history. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time of day is it for you? Because mysteries like this belong not to one place or one moment, but to all of us, connected across distance and time. In the years leading up to the Second World War, Iraq was a land still holding many of its secrets beneath the soil. Archaeologists worked feverishly across Mesopotamia, uncovering palaces, tablets, statues, and remnants of cultures that had shaped human history itself. Among these scholars was Wilhelm Koenig, a German archaeologist serving as the director of the National Museum of Iraq in Baghdad. He was a man accustomed to fragments, to dust, to pieces of antiquity that seemed ordinary at first glance, but sometimes carried worlds within them. In 1938, while moving through the storerooms of the museum, Koenig's attention was caught by something that seemed deceptively plain. A small clay jar, unglazed, about the size of a fist. At first sight, there was nothing unusual. Archaeologists encountered thousands of such jars. They were the vessels of everyday life, used to hold wine, oil, or precious ointments. But Koenig was not satisfied with a cursory glance. He noticed something strange lodged inside the jar. Peering more closely, he discovered a rolled sheet of copper fitted snugly against the clay. Within that copper cylinder lay an iron rod, corroded and pitted with age. The top was sealed with bitumen, a tar-like substance that kept the contents in place. The object looked less like a vessel and more like a contraption. It was a puzzle, and Koenig's mind began to turn. He lifted the jar into his hands, feeling its weight, sensing that this was no simple container. Its inner arrangement seemed deliberate. Why roll copper into a tube unless to serve a function? Why place an iron rod within it? The combination of materials felt mechanical, purposeful. Koenig was experienced enough to know when an artifact resisted easy classification, and this jar resisted with stubborn silence. Back at his desk, he sketched the pieces and considered their arrangement. Copper and iron are metals known since antiquity, and bitumen had been used for waterproofing, for sealing, for binding. But together, in this way, what did they mean? Koenig's mind wandered to experiments with electricity, to the batteries of Alessandro Volta discovered in the early 19th century. The resemblance was uncanny. A copper cylinder, an iron core, a sealed container. If an acidic liquid were poured inside, something as common as vinegar or lemon juice, could this jar generate electricity? The thought was audacious. To suggest that electricity had been harnessed 2,000 years before the modern world claimed it was almost heretical. Electricity, in the common imagination, belonged to Benjamin Franklin with his kite, to Volta with his piles, to Edison with his light bulbs. Yet here was an object that seemed to whisper of another story. Koenig began to wonder if he was holding in his hands not just a jar, but a window into forgotten knowledge. He shared his observations with colleagues, and as expected, skepticism greeted him. Some dismissed the idea outright. They argued that the jar was simply a storage container, perhaps used for scrolls or sacred scroll fragments, perhaps for medicines or precious oils. They pointed out that no other examples of such devices had been found. Without a context, without a tradition, how could one isolated jar rewrite the history of science? Yet Koenig could not shake the sense that the artifact was extraordinary. The setting of the discovery made it even more intriguing. Mesopotamia, cradle of civilization, was the birthplace of writing, law, and astronomy. The Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians had long observed the heavens, mapped the stars, devised calendars. They were masters of irrigation, of metallurgy, of mathematics. Could it be possible that among their many achievements was the accidental or deliberate discovery of electricity? The jar, silent in the museum's storeroom, seemed to suggest so. Koenig eventually published his theory in 1940, proposing that the jar was a form of galvanic cell, a primitive battery. His article was met with both fascination and ridicule. Some hailed it as a daring insight, proof that the ancients were far more advanced than we believed. Others dismissed it as a fanciful interpretation, a projection of modern ideas onto ancient artifacts. The Baghdad Battery, as it would come to be known, entered history not as a settled fact, but as a mystery, one that scholars and dreamers alike would wrestle with for decades to come. The discovery in Baghdad is not only about one jar. It is about the moment when an archaeologist held in his hands the possibility that history was far stranger than the textbooks allowed. The jar's clay walls, the copper sheet, the iron rod, and the bitumen seal are simple enough when seen separately, but together they whisper of purpose. Whether that purpose was electrical or not, the artifact refuses to sit quietly in the past. It demands attention. It insists on being more than it appears. As the world hurtled toward war and the museum's collections were shuffled and sometimes neglected, the Baghdad Battery became a symbol. For some, it symbolized the ingenuity of forgotten cultures. For others, it symbolized the dangers of overinterpretation. Yet, in its mystery, in its refusal to be fully explained, it has endured. The story of its discovery is the beginning of a larger tale, one that stretches from the dusty storerooms of Baghdad to laboratories where modern scientists have poured vinegar into replicas and watched needles flicker with charge. The Baghdad Battery was not discovered in the ruins of a temple or beneath the sands of a desert. It was discovered in a storeroom, overlooked, ordinary, waiting. That fact alone gives it a haunting quality. How many other mysteries lie hidden in boxes, mislabeled, misidentified, waiting for someone to notice? The discovery in Baghdad reminds us that history is not only written in monuments and grand finds, but also in the quiet corners where forgotten objects rest. It teaches us that the past is patient, that it waits for curious eyes to uncover its secrets. And so the story begins, not with certainty, but with a question. A jar, a copper tube, an iron rod, and a seal of bitumen. Is it a container for oil or the world's first battery? Is it mundane or miraculous? The truth lies buried in time, but the discovery in Baghdad ensures that the question will never stop being asked. To understand the mystery of the Baghdad Battery, we must look not at the legends that surround it, but at the artifact itself, stripped to its components, silent in their simplicity, yet suggestive of purpose. Imagine the archaeologist lifting the jar from the storeroom shelf, brushing away the dust of centuries, peering into its cracked mouth and finding within not emptiness, but design. The artifact is not large, no grand machine or intricate sculpture, but rather a humble clay vessel, unglazed and coarse, roughly the size of a man's hand. And yet it is this unassuming size that conceals a secret powerful enough to unsettle our picture of history. The outer shell of the object is a jar made from fired clay, shaped with the skill of an ordinary potter. Its walls are thick enough to hold liquid, sturdy enough to endure handling, and unremarkable to the eye. Such jars were common in Mesopotamia and Persia, used for oils, wines, medicines, and daily storage. Nothing in its exterior suggests strangeness. But inside the jar lies the first anomaly, a cylinder of copper sheet, carefully rolled and slipped into the hollow. The copper is thin yet deliberate, fitted against the jar's interior, forming a lining like the sheath of a hidden tool. Within this copper cylinder rests an iron rod, corroded and dark with age, its once sharp surface now pitted and rough. The rod does not touch the copper, for it is suspended inside, isolated except at the top, where both metals are sealed by a layer of bitumen. This tar-like substance, sticky when first applied and hardened across centuries, binds the assembly together. It closes the jar, insulating the metals, fixing them into position. The iron rod juts slightly above the seal, as if to be grasped or connected to something else, while the copper remains hidden within the clay. Taken together, the arrangement is striking. A clay jar, a copper lining, an iron rod, and a bitumen seal. Separately, they are ordinary. Together, they resemble the structure of a galvanic cell, the very principle of a battery. In modern laboratories, a similar design, filled with an acidic electrolyte such as vinegar or lemon juice, would produce a current, small but measurable, enough to make a needle twitch or a faint shock pass through the skin. The anatomy of the Baghdad Battery whispers this possibility, even if it never shouted it in its own time. But to claim it as a battery is to move from anatomy to interpretation, and anatomy alone does not settle the question. Perhaps the copper cylinder was not intended to conduct but to store. Perhaps the iron rod was not meant to serve as an electrode, but as a stopper, a handle, a plug. The bitumen could be nothing more than a seal against spillage. Skeptics point out that all these parts could serve ordinary functions unrelated to electricity. A jar with an inner lining to protect its contents, a rod to secure a stopper, a seal to keep it tight. The pieces are versatile, their purpose uncertain. Yet, the way the parts fit together resists dismissal. The copper is not a random scrap, but a shaped cylinder. The iron rod is not decorative, but functional in its placement. The bitumen is not casually applied, but carefully sealed. When modern researchers reconstructed the jar and poured an acidic liquid, electricity did indeed emerge. Faint, but real. The anatomy makes the possibility undeniable, even if the original intent remains beyond proof. In examining the artifact closely, we also notice traces that deepen the enigma. The corrosion patterns on the copper suggest long exposure to liquid. The iron rod shows pitting consistent with chemical reaction. The bitumen is thick, as though meant to withstand pressure or seepage. These clues hint that the jar was not merely symbolic, but functional, used and reused until abandoned or buried. The body of the artifact carries scars of its life, though the exact story remains unreadable. When scholars and experimenters describe the Baghdad battery, they often linger on its scale. It produces less than a volt of electricity, hardly enough to light even the dimmest bulb. But the ancients did not need light bulbs. A faint charge would have been sufficient for electroplating small objects with a sheen of gold or silver, or for creating a tingling sensation in the skin during rituals, or for impressing observers with a mysterious spark. In such uses, the anatomy of the artifact makes sense, a device built not for power, but for wonder. And so we return to the clay jar, cracked and ordinary on the outside, extraordinary within. Its anatomy is simple, its parts unpretentious, yet the whole defies easy categorization. To some it is a battery, to others a storage jar, to still others a vessel of ritual. But whatever its purpose, its construction is deliberate. It was made by hands that understood how to shape copper, to forge iron, to seal with bitumen, to assemble pieces into a coherent whole. Its makers may not have spoken the language of volts and amperes, but they built something that, by our definitions, works as a battery. The Baghdad battery's anatomy is a paradox. It is simple yet mysterious, ordinary in material, but extraordinary in implication. To hold it is to hold both clay and copper, but also to hold a question that has lingered for nearly a century. Did the ancients know electricity, or have we misread their intention? The answer lies not only in the artifact itself, but in the stories we weave around it. Yet the anatomy remains, silent and undeniable, a riddle carved in clay and metal, daring us to decide whether we are looking at a jar or at the first spark of a forgotten science. When Wilhelm Koenig first suggested that the clay jar with its copper and iron components might have been a battery, the idea spread like a spark through the scholarly world. Electricity in antiquity, how could such a thing be possible? For some it was a revelation, for others an absurdity, but for all it was a mystery too alluring to ignore. The Baghdad battery was no longer just an artifact, it was a question mark etched into history, and that question drew theories from every corner of imagination. The most compelling theory, the one that transformed the jar into legend, is that it functioned as a galvanic cell. In this view, the copper cylinder served as one electrode, the iron rod as the other, and the jar itself as the container for an electrolyte. When filled with an acidic liquid such as vinegar, grape juice, or lemon juice, the assembly could generate a small electric current. Replicas built in modern laboratories have demonstrated exactly this, producing between half a volt and a single volt. The current is weak by modern standards, but unmistakably real. It could cause a mild tingling when touched, enough to impress, enough to suggest that the ancients had indeed captured lightning in a jar. What could such electricity have been used for? One theory points to electroplating, the process of depositing a thin layer of precious metal onto an object. A small current can carry ions of gold or silver onto the surface of another metal, creating the appearance of solid gold without the expense. In the bazaars of Mesopotamia, a merchant selling jewelry or ceremonial objects with a gleaming finish might have benefited from such a process. Modern experiments using replicas of the Baghdad battery have shown that electroplating is indeed possible, though delicate and inconsistent. If true, this would suggest that the ancients had not only stumbled upon electricity, but had applied it to craftsmanship and commerce. Another theory turns away from utility toward ritual. Electricity, even in its smallest forms, has always carried an air of wonder. The Greeks of antiquity marveled at amber rubbed with fur, which could attract bits of straw, a phenomenon they called electron. To feel a shock from a jar, to see sparks leap from metal, would have seemed miraculous to those unacquainted with the science behind it. Perhaps priests or magicians used the Baghdad battery to inspire awe, to demonstrate the touch of the divine, to persuade the faithful that gods had lent them power. A mild shock delivered during a ceremony or a hidden spark passed through an idol could create an unforgettable effect. In this interpretation, the battery was less a tool of science than an instrument of belief. There is also the possibility that the battery served a medical purpose. The ancients were not strangers to the idea of using electric phenomena for healing. Roman texts describe the application of electric fish to numb pain, an early form of electrotherapy. Could the Baghdad battery have been used in a similar way, applying mild shocks to stimulate or soothe the body? The small current it produced may have been felt as a tingle, a sensation interpreted as therapeutic. This theory stretches evidence thin, but it reflects the ingenuity of people seeking explanations for the artifact's existence. Yet for every theory that embraces electricity, there are skeptics who argue against it. Some suggest that the jar was nothing more than a storage container, its copper and iron inserts intended for practical, non-electrical purposes. Perhaps the copper cylinder was a scroll holder, the iron rod a fastening device, the bitumen seal a simple plug. The resemblance to a battery, they argue, is coincidence, a projection of modern minds eager to find themselves in the past. Without direct evidence of wires, of connections, of applications, how can we be certain that electricity was ever intended? The debate between believers and skeptics has raged for decades. Each side brings experiments, reconstructions, and arguments, yet the artifact itself remains silent. Theories of electricity swirl around it like storms around a mountain, but the mountain does not speak. This silence is part of its power. If we could know with certainty, the mystery would fade, and the Baghdad battery would lose its allure. But because we do not, it continues to inspire, to provoke, to draw minds into speculation. Some scholars broaden the question further. Even if the Baghdad battery was not intended as a battery, could it still have been part of a wider experimentation with electricity in antiquity? We know that natural phenomena such as lightning and static were observed. We know that ancient cultures were skilled at metallurgy, chemistry, and craft. It is not unthinkable that they might have stumbled upon galvanic reactions by accident. Perhaps the Baghdad battery is not proof of systematic science, but of curiosity, of tinkering that brushed against discoveries before vanishing into obscurity. Theories of electricity are more than technical explanations. They are reflections of how we see the past. If we believe that progress is linear, that humanity has climbed step by steady step toward knowledge, then the Baghdad battery must be dismissed as misinterpreted. But if we believe that progress is fragile, that brilliance can flare and fade, then the battery becomes a relic of forgotten genius, a survivor of a tradition lost to war, neglect, or disinterest. Each theory reveals not only a view of the artifact, but a philosophy of history itself. In the end, the Baghdad battery sits at the crossroads of fact and imagination. Its anatomy allows electricity, its experiments confirm it, its context refuses to settle the matter. The theories that surround it are less answers than questions, mirrors in which we see our own assumptions about what is possible. Was it a tool, a trick, a therapy, or simply a jar misunderstood? The truth lies buried in time, but the electricity of the debate still crackles, alive, refusing to fade. From the moment Koenig proposed that the humble jar from Baghdad might be a battery, the question shifted from theory to experiment. Could such a device, if reconstructed faithfully, actually produce electricity? Scholars, engineers, and enthusiasts across the world set about replicating the artifact, bringing copper sheets and iron rods into their workshops, sealing them into clay jars, and filling them with the kinds of liquids the ancients might have had at hand. What emerged from these replications was not only science but spectacle, a drama in which the past revealed hints of its secrets through the humblest of voltages. The earliest experiments were conducted in the mid-20th century, when the notion of ancient electricity was still considered outrageous by many. Replicas were built using unglazed pottery, copper rolled into tubes, iron rods placed inside, and the top sealed with modern substitutes for bitumen. When vinegar, lemon juice, or grape juice was poured into the jar, a voltmeter connected to the copper and iron registered a charge. It was weak, barely enough to move the needle, but it was there. Electricity, the silent force that had once been thought modern, flowed from a reconstruction of an artifact 2,000 years old. In subsequent experiments, researchers refined their approach. They discovered that the voltage could range from half a volt to nearly 1 volt per jar, depending on the electrolyte used and the condition of the metals. By linking several jars in series, like batteries stacked together, the output could be multiplied. A dozen replicas connected by wires could produce enough electricity to make a faint spark, to drive a small current through the skin, or to deposit a trace of metal in a simple electroplating experiment. Suddenly, the Baghdad battery was no longer only a theory, but a functioning device, albeit modest in its power. One of the most dramatic replications occurred in the 1970s, when Willard Gray of the General Electric High Voltage Laboratory built a series of batteries modeled on the Baghdad artifact. Using grape juice as the electrolyte, he demonstrated electroplating by depositing a thin layer of silver onto another metal. The result was tangible, a shiny surface created not by hammering or gilding, but by electricity generated from jars of clay. The experiment stunned observers and lent weight to the theory that the ancients might have used such devices for decorative purposes. Yet the replications also revealed the limitations. The charge was inconsistent, the output small, and the maintenance awkward. Copper and iron corrode quickly in acidic solutions, and the jars lose effectiveness within hours or days. To sustain electricity for long periods would have required constant replacement or repair. Skeptics seized on these weaknesses, arguing that such fragility made the idea of practical use unlikely. A true technology, they insisted, must be durable, repeatable, and widespread, not a curiosity that fails after a few uses. Even so, the experiments captured the imagination of the public. Documentaries displayed glowing bulbs connected to rows of reconstructed Baghdad batteries, though in truth, the original device could never have powered such things. School science fairs across the world encouraged children to build their own, filling jars with vinegar and marveling as small meters twitched with life. In these moments, the artifact transcended archaeology and became a symbol, a bridge between ancient curiosity and modern wonder, a reminder that even the faintest spark can inspire awe. Modern replications have gone further, using advanced imaging to model the original fragments and produce replicas as close as possible to the authentic artifact. Computer simulations test the chemical reactions inside, confirming that the device could indeed generate current. Experimental archaeologists continue to explore not only whether it works, but how it might have been used, connecting replicas to pieces of jewelry, attempting plating, or using them in ritual demonstrations. Each experiment, whether successful or flawed, adds another layer to the story, weaving possibility into the silence of the past. The replications also serve another purpose. They remind us that science is not only about what is known, but about what can be imagined. By rebuilding the Baghdad battery, researchers do not prove definitively that the ancients used electricity. Instead, they show that they could have. The line between could and did is wide, but it is a line worth exploring. To demonstrate that the artifact works as a battery is to keep the debate alive, to leave open the door that history has tried to close. Experiments and replications reveal the paradox of the Baghdad battery. As a source of electricity, it is real but weak, functional but fragile. It cannot light a city or even a lamp, but it can tingle the skin, move a needle, deposit a shimmer of metal. In that small power lies its allure. It is not what it can do that haunts us, but what it represents. If the ancients built one, could they have built more? If they saw sparks, if they felt shocks, what did they think of them? Did they see the touch of the gods? Or did they begin to grasp the principles of a force that would not be fully mastered until millennia later? To watch a reconstructed Baghdad battery at work is to witness time collapsing. Clay, copper, iron, and fruit juice combine to release energy, the same invisible current that flows through our modern world of lights and machines. The spark that leaps from the jar is both ancient and modern, both trivial and profound. It is a reminder that the line between past and present is thin, that knowledge is fragile, and that sometimes the simplest experiments can shake the certainties of history. To truly grasp the enigma of the Baghdad battery, one must step back into the world that might have produced it. Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, is often called the cradle of civilization. It was here that writing first bloomed on clay tablets, that laws were carved into stone, that cities rose from mud brick walls, and that humanity began to measure time not only by seasons, but by stars. It was a place where survival demanded innovation, where harsh rivers had to be tamed with irrigation, where trade carried knowledge across deserts and mountains, and where curiosity about the world gave birth to systems of record, calculation, and belief. To speak of a mysterious device found in Baghdad is to speak of a land steeped in both practical craft and intellectual ambition. The people of ancient Mesopotamia were observers of nature in the deepest sense. They watched the flooding of rivers, the phases of the moon, the rise of constellations, and the cycles of the sun. From their observations came some of the earliest calendars, crucial for farmers who had to plant and harvest with precision. Priests and scribes recorded celestial movements on clay tablets, blending astronomy with divination. For them, the sky was not only a stage of divine will, but also a pattern that could be read, calculated, and perhaps even predicted. Knowledge of cycles was both sacred and useful, and in this blend of practicality and spirituality lay the seeds of science. Their craft extended into metallurgy as well. From as early as the 3rd millennium before our era, Mesopotamian artisans smelted copper, forged bronze, and worked with iron in later centuries. They created tools, weapons, and ornaments with skill that testified to generations of experiment. They understood how different metals behaved under heat, how to combine them, how to shape them into durable and beautiful objects. If a jar lined with copper and fitted with iron could generate electricity, the people of Mesopotamia had at least the technical skill to construct it. Whether they knew the principle behind it or merely stumbled upon the effect remains an open question. Chemistry, too, found its beginnings in their hands. Bitumen, the sticky black substance that seeps naturally from the earth in the region, was gathered and used as adhesive, waterproofing, and sealant. Perfumes were distilled, medicines brewed, dyes extracted from plants and insects. In their daily practice, the ancients were alchemists before the word existed, manipulating materials, experimenting with mixtures, refining techniques. Within such a culture, it is not unthinkable that someone might have discovered that certain combinations of copper, iron, and acid-bearing liquids produce strange sensations, tingles on the skin, even sparks. Perhaps they did not name it electricity, but they would have recognized its presence as a force. The intellectual life of Mesopotamia also gave rise to mathematics, another pillar that could support experimentation. Clay tablets reveal multiplication tables, quadratic equations, and calculations of astronomical phenomena. Scribes trained for years to master the sexagesimal system, a base 60 mathematics that still shapes how we measure time in hours, minutes, and seconds. This mathematical sophistication allowed them to predict eclipses and trace planetary motions. It suggests a mindset attuned not only to observation, but to abstraction. capable of imagining patterns unseen. Such a mindset might have welcomed the strangeness of a jar that produced shocks, seeing in it both mystery and potential. At the heart of Mesopotamian science was its entanglement with religion. The gods were not distant abstractions, but active forces whose will was read in omens, stars, and storms. Priests held power because they interpreted signs, and knowledge itself was divine. If electricity was encountered, it would not have been filed under natural philosophy, as in later Greek tradition, but under sacred power. A spark from a jar could be proof of divine presence, a sign of favor or warning. In this sense, the Baghdad battery, if it functioned as a battery, would not have been a scientific instrument in the modern sense, but a ritual object infused with meaning. The wider world of Mesopotamia was one of exchange. Caravans carried goods along trade routes that stretched into Persia, India, and the Mediterranean. Ideas traveled with them: new techniques, foreign artifacts, whispers of strange practices. If the Baghdad battery was part of a larger experimentation with electricity, its inspiration may not have been isolated. Perhaps knowledge of galvanic reactions traveled like stories, carried from one culture to another, adapted and forgotten, revived and lost. In a world so interconnected, the jar in Baghdad may be a survivor of a tradition that spanned beyond Mesopotamia itself. Yet there is an irony in this vision. For all their brilliance, the Mesopotamians left no written record describing electricity. Their tablets speak of gods and kings, of trade and astronomy, but not of galvanic cells. If they knew the secret, they kept it hidden, or perhaps they never thought it remarkable enough to record. In this silence lies the mystery. The Baghdad battery is both plausible in its cultural context and unsupported by direct evidence. It sits between what we can imagine and what we can prove. The study of Mesopotamia reminds us that science is not born whole, but emerges through layers of practice, ritual, and accident. The people who first measured time with shadows, who carved laws into stone, who traced the heavens with careful marks, were capable of great leaps of imagination. If they held in their hands a jar that tingled with power, they would not have dismissed it. They would have used it, interpreted it, perhaps even revered it. The Baghdad battery, whether a true electrical device or not, belongs in this world of restless curiosity and profound mystery. When we gaze upon the fragments today, we are not only looking at copper and clay. We are looking into a civilization that invented writing, codified law, measured the sky, and shaped metal with fire. In that context, the possibility of electricity does not feel impossible. It feels like one more spark in a land already ablaze with innovation. The Baghdad battery, in its silence, carries the weight of Mesopotamia's legacy, reminding us that the boundaries of ancient science are wider than we often allow, and that the line between myth and knowledge is thinner than we believe. When replicas of the Baghdad battery first yielded a faint but undeniable current, the next question rose with irresistible force. What could the ancients have done with such electricity? A single volt is weak by modern standards, far too small to light a lamp or power a machine, but not so small as to be useless. Electricity, even in delicate trickles, can be harnessed. One of the most compelling theories is that the Baghdad battery was used for electroplating, the process of depositing a thin layer of precious metal onto another surface through the movement of ions in solution. To understand the allure of this theory, imagine yourself walking through the markets of Mesopotamia 2,000 years ago. Traders call out from shaded stalls, their tables spread with jewelry, vessels, ornaments, and religious icons. Gold and silver gleam in the sun, but not all of it may be solid. Some pieces may be crafted of copper or bronze, then covered with a whisper-thin skin of precious metal that gives the appearance of wealth without the cost. To achieve such a finish by hammering or gilding is possible and known in antiquity, but to achieve it with the precision and luster of electroplating would have been remarkable. Modern experimenters have tested this possibility, using reconstructed batteries connected by wires to a small object immersed in an electrolyte solution containing dissolved metal ions. They succeeded in depositing a thin layer of silver onto copper. The process was delicate and slow, but it worked. Under the dim light of a workshop, an artisan watching dull copper gradually take on a silver sheen would have felt the thrill of transformation, a sense that they were coaxing the very essence of the metal to leap from one surface to another. If such a technique were known in ancient Mesopotamia, it could explain the presence of highly decorated objects whose surfaces gleam beyond what hammering or leaf could provide. The idea also fits with the cultural context. Mesopotamian artisans were masters of metallurgy and ornamentation. They produced filigree jewelry of great delicacy, inlays of lapis and carnelian, and ritual vessels of astonishing beauty. Their patrons, from priests to kings, demanded luxury that demonstrated power and piety. A method that could stretch gold and silver further, that could create the illusion of abundance, would have been valuable. The Baghdad battery, in this view, becomes not only an experiment in electricity, but a tool of economy and display, a silent partner in the making of wealth. Yet the theory of electroplating is not without its challenges. Critics point out that no ancient workshop has yielded clear evidence of electrodes, wires, or solutions used for plating. No texts describe the process. The objects often cited as examples of ancient electroplating may show surface treatments achieved by other means, such as gilding or fire gilding with mercury, a method well attested in antiquity. The battery itself, with its fragile output, would have required many jars linked together to achieve a steady current, making the operation cumbersome. In the absence of clear archaeological evidence, the theory remains speculative. Still, speculation is part of what keeps the Baghdad battery alive in the imagination. The thought that artisans may have gathered in a workshop, lining up jars filled with vinegar, connecting copper wires, dipping ornaments into solutions, and watching them emerge with shimmering skins of silver or gold is too vivid to dismiss. Even if no such scene ever occurred, the possibility haunts us, reminding us of how close imagination can run to history. The power of the electroplating theory lies also in its symbolism. To plate a humble object with precious metal is to disguise, to transform, to elevate. It is alchemy in practice, turning the ordinary into the extraordinary. The Baghdad battery, itself a humble jar of clay transformed into a symbol of ancient genius, mirrors this symbolism. It too is coated in layers of meaning, its true core hidden, its value debated. Just as plating covers the surface of an object, interpretations of the battery cover its mystery, each theory a sheen of possibility that may or may not conceal the truth beneath. For those who favor the electroplating explanation, the Baghdad battery is evidence not only of forgotten science, but of forgotten craft. It suggests that knowledge was practical, applied, tied to commerce and ritual rather than abstract curiosity. It implies that electricity was not a philosophical toy, but a working tool, integrated into the lives of artisans who sought to satisfy the demands of their patrons. In this view, the device is less mysterious and more human, a reminder that the pursuit of beauty has often driven technological innovation as much as the pursuit of knowledge. Whether true or not, the idea of electroplating lingers. It bridges the gap between possibility and need, between what the battery can do and what the ancients might have wanted. It transforms a jar into a machine, an artisan into an alchemist, a marketplace into a laboratory. It allows us to imagine a world in which electricity was not entirely unknown, but woven subtly into the fabric of life, hidden beneath the shimmer of gold and silver that adorned the temples and courts of Mesopotamia. The Baghdad battery may never yield its secret, but the theory of electroplating keeps alive the sense that it had one. In the thin sheen of metal deposited by a reconstructed battery, we glimpse the possibility that the ancients, too, sought to harness invisible forces for beauty and power. It is a possibility that shimmers, fragile and alluring, like a thin layer of silver that might vanish with time, yet still catches the light of imagination. When electricity emerges from a jar filled with vinegar, the modern mind reaches for explanations rooted in science and craft. We think of plating metals, of experiments in chemistry, of technological utility. Yet, the world of ancient Mesopotamia was not divided so neatly. For them, the natural and the supernatural intertwined. A force that could shock, that could sting the skin or make sparks leap from metal, would not have been treated as a mere tool. It would have been seen as a sign, a wonder, perhaps even the touch of the divine. To understand the Baghdad battery in its own time, we must consider not only practical uses, but also its possible role as a ritual or religious symbol. Electricity has always been a spectacle. Even in our modern age, lightning strikes capture us with awe, the sky splitting open in violent light, the air vibrating with thunder. Imagine how much more terrifying and sacred such phenomena must have seemed to ancient peoples who had no scientific framework to explain them. The gods hurled lightning in their myths. The heavens flashed their approval or anger in storms. To hold in one's hand a jar that could produce a faint echo of this divine fire would be to hold a fragment of the god's own power. In this context, the Baghdad battery may have been used not in workshops, but in temples. A priest, cloaked in ritual garments, could produce a shock upon touching an idol or upon clasping the hand of a supplicant. The sensation, subtle yet unforgettable, would confirm the presence of unseen forces. Worshippers would leave convinced that the god had spoken through touch, that the sacred object had breathed its power into them. The battery would then be less an invention than a miracle, an instrument through which ritual gained weight and authority. Some reconstructions of possible rituals have been staged by modern researchers, connecting multiple replicas of the Baghdad battery in series and directing the current through hidden wires. They have delivered mild shocks to volunteers. The effect is not painful, but startling, a tingling that catches the breath, an electric kiss that feels alive. To those unprepared for it, it seems supernatural. In the candlelit chambers of a Mesopotamian temple, such an experience could only have deepened the awe of the faithful. The symbolism of copper, iron, and bitumen may also have carried ritual significance. Copper was a metal associated with beauty and craftsmanship, often linked to the goddess Inanna or Ishtar. Iron, rarer in earlier times, was associated with strength and with celestial bodies, sometimes called the gift of the gods, because meteoric iron literally fell from the heavens. Bitumen, seeping from the earth, was used in burials and in sealing sacred spaces, a substance that bound and protected. To combine these three materials into a single artifact could have had symbolic meaning beyond any functional purpose. The jar may have been seen as a vessel uniting elements of earth and sky, a container of divine essence. Even the act of pouring liquid into the jar could have been ritualized. Vinegar, wine, or other acidic solutions might have served as offerings, libations to the gods. The moment the liquid touched copper and iron, the jar would awaken with unseen energy. Sparks might leap if metal wires were connected, or a tingle might run through the skin of one who touched it. To the participants, the connection between offering and divine response would have been unmistakable. The battery becomes an altar in miniature, a device that translates ritual into sensation. Skeptics argue that such interpretations are romantic, born of our fascination with mystery rather than hard evidence. No temple inscriptions speak of electrical miracles, no carvings show priests wielding wires, no hymns describe divine sparks. Yet ritual, by its nature, often left little physical trace beyond memory and belief. Many practices are lost to time, leaving us only with artifacts whose functions we struggle to imagine. The Baghdad battery, with its ambiguous form, invites precisely this kind of speculation. If we accept the ritual theory, then the battery tells us something profound about the relationship between knowledge and power. Electricity, however faint, is a force that commands attention. To control it, to summon it in front of others, is to claim authority. Priests, kings, or shamans who possess such devices would not have explained them as machines but as gifts from the gods. In their hands, science and magic were indistinguishable. The Baghdad battery thus becomes not a forgotten tool of technology, but a relic of performance, a stage prop of the sacred, used to bind belief and reinforce power. What makes this interpretation haunting is that it mirrors how humans have always treated the unknown. We see something we cannot explain, and we place it in the realm of the sacred. We hear thunder and imagine gods. We feel a shock and imagine spirits. The Baghdad battery, whatever its actual function, reveals this timeless human impulse to interpret sensation as meaning. Whether it shocked an artisan at work or a worshiper at prayer, its effect would have been the same: awe, wonder, and the conviction that forces larger than ourselves were at play. The theory of ritual use does not prove that the ancients understood electricity in the way we do. It suggests instead that they experienced it, felt it, and wove it into the fabric of their beliefs. In this way, the Baghdad battery becomes less about lost technology and more about the universal human hunger to touch the divine. It stands as a reminder that mystery itself can be sacred, that sometimes the power of an object lies not in what it does, but in what people believe it does. And so we look again at the clay jar, the copper cylinder, the iron rod sealed in bitumen. It is easy to see a machine. It is just as easy to see a relic of ritual. Perhaps it was both. Perhaps the people who built it did not distinguish between the two. For them, science and religion were threads of the same cloth, woven together, inseparable. The Baghdad battery may have been a vessel not only of acid and metal, but of meaning, a jar that held not just electricity, but belief itself. Not every scholar who has looked upon the so-called Baghdad battery has been persuaded by visions of sparks and divine fire. For many, the jar speaks not of electricity, but of something far more ordinary, a vessel of storage, perhaps even an object related to medicine. In their view, the device does not belong to the history of science, but to the daily and ritual lives of the people who shaped it. To trace this interpretation is to wander into a different kind of mystery, one that asks whether the power of the artifact lies not in what it could do, but in what it once contained. The jar itself, stripped of imagination, is unremarkable. Clay vessels of similar size and shape are found in abundance across Mesopotamian sites. They were the Tupperware of their time, used to hold oils, perfumes, ointments, medicines, and scrolls. The copper lining could have served a practical function, protecting the contents from contamination, shielding fragile substances from contact with porous clay, or perhaps preventing reactions with the jar itself. The iron rod in this reading might have been nothing more than a stopper or a handle, fixed into place with bitumen to keep the contents sealed. What modern eyes see as electrodes may have been nothing more than practical components of a container. Consider the world of Mesopotamian medicine. Clay tablets record recipes for salves and potions, mixtures of herbs, minerals, and oils meant to treat ailments both physical and spiritual. Copper was known to have antimicrobial properties, even if not explained in modern terms. Iron, too, was associated with strength and celestial origins, sometimes regarded as protective. A jar lined with copper and closed with iron might have been seen as especially suited for storing remedies, its very materials lending power to the medicines within. If so, the Baghdad battery becomes not a machine but a pharmacy jar, an object of healing rather than of science. Some scholars suggest that the shape and sealing of the jar make it more likely to have been used for sacred oils or scrolls. Bitumen provided a waterproof seal, ensuring that the contents remained intact. In a world where documents were precious and sacred texts rare, a container that kept them safe would have been valued. The copper and iron may have had symbolic as well as practical significance, chosen not to conduct current, but to guard what was hidden inside. Such an interpretation strips away the drama of electricity, but leaves us with a vessel no less intriguing, one whose value lay in preservation rather than production. The medical interpretation gains further weight when we remember how little the ancients separated healing from ritual. To apply a salve was not only to treat the body, but to call upon the gods. The materials of the jar might therefore have carried double significance: copper for its purifying quality, iron for its strength, bitumen for its sealing against corruption. The combination becomes a talisman of health, a container both functional and symbolic. When modern scientists pour vinegar into the jar and draw electricity, they may be reenacting a process that was never intended, misinterpreting a vessel whose true purpose was far more grounded in daily life. Yet this interpretation too leaves puzzles. Why such precise construction? Why roll copper into a cylinder rather than shape it differently? Why fit it so carefully into the jar? Why an iron rod positioned exactly within it? The assembly seems deliberate in a way that exceeds simple storage. Ordinary containers did not require such arrangements. The very precision that fuels the battery theory also undermines the idea of casual storage. Unless, of course, the precision had symbolic value, a ritual logic that made sense to its makers but eludes us now. There is also the silence of context. No other jars, quite like the Baghdad battery, have been found in medical or storage settings. If it was common practice, we would expect dozens or hundreds. Instead, we have only fragments, isolated and enigmatic. This scarcity leaves both theories, the electrical and the medicinal, floating in uncertainty. Each can be imagined, neither can be proven. The jar itself does not confess, and the earth around it has offered few companions. What is striking is how both interpretations, battery and storage, speak to human needs. One sees in the jar a tool of science, a way to plate metal or summon sparks. The other sees a vessel of care, a way to preserve medicines or sacred substances. Both are forms of power. Electricity dazzles, healing restores, and in both cases the jar becomes an instrument of influence over body, spirit, and perception. Whether it shocked the skin or soothed it, whether it plated gold or stored oils, the object served to extend human reach into realms of wonder and survival. The storage or medicine theory reminds us that sometimes the extraordinary hides in the ordinary. A clay jar is easy to dismiss, yet it may have been central to practices we no longer understand. In our eagerness to imagine ancient electricity, we may overlook the subtler mysteries of ancient medicine, the lost recipes, the forgotten rituals, the intimate ways people sought to master their world. The Baghdad battery, seen as a storage jar, is no less mysterious for being mundane. It whispers of lives lived, of needs met, of knowledge once held and then forgotten. And so the artifact remains poised between interpretations, a battery or a medicine jar, a spark or a salve, a miracle of science or a tool of healing. Each theory reflects not only what we see, but what we wish to see. Not only what the jar was, but what we believe it could have been. The truth may lie forever buried in the silence of Mesopotamia, but the possibilities ensure that the jar will never again be seen as simple clay. It is more than a container. It is a question, and in that question resides its enduring power. The Baghdad battery stands alone in its form, a clay jar lined with copper and fitted with iron. Yet the mystery it embodies does not exist in isolation. Across the ancient world, traces of curiosity about electricity and its strange effects flicker in unexpected places, like sparks hidden in the folds of history. When we widen our gaze beyond Mesopotamia, we begin to see parallels, echoes of knowledge that suggest humanity has brushed against the invisible force of electricity more than once, only to lose hold of it before it could take root. The Greeks, centuries before Koenig ever looked upon the Baghdad jar, had already named the strange attraction produced by rubbing amber with fur. They called it electron, the root of our modern word electricity. Thales of Miletus, a philosopher of the 6th century before our era, wrote of how amber, when rubbed, could attract light objects such as straw or hair. To his contemporaries, it seemed magical, a property of certain stones imbued with hidden life. Though they did not build devices from it, they recognized the phenomenon, recorded it, and gave it a name that would echo across millennia. Theirs was the first brush with static electricity, a whisper of the force that would one day light cities. In ancient Egypt, too, there are hints of knowledge. Texts and wall carvings describe the electric catfish and Nile torpedo fish, creatures capable of delivering numbing shocks. Physicians recommended their use in treating pain, applying them to the body, much as later Romans did with electric rays. These were early forms of electrotherapy, practiced without understanding of current or charge, yet guided by observation of effect. To place a hand in the Nile and feel a sudden sting was to encounter electricity in its rawest form, and the Egyptians were wise enough to harness it, if only crudely, for healing. The Romans carried this tradition further. Scribonius Largus, a physician in the 1st century of our era, wrote of using the shocks of electric fish to relieve headaches and gout. To sit with one's feet on a live torpedo ray was to feel the pain recede, not through magic, but through the numbing power of electrical discharge. Though primitive, this was a recognition that unseen forces could be directed toward human needs. It reveals that even in cultures without batteries, electricity was not wholly unknown. It was felt in rivers, in storms, in living bodies, and occasionally tamed for use. China, too, offers tantalizing parallels. Records from the Han Dynasty speak of experiments with magnetism, of lodestones that pointed north, of stones that could attract iron. While magnetism is distinct from electricity, the two are twin forces, and the recognition of one often leads to the exploration of the other. Ancient Chinese scholars, attentive to the properties of nature, may not have built batteries, but their curiosity about invisible forces places them within the same broad tradition of inquiry. Even in the Americas, long before contact with Eurasia, civilizations observed phenomena that suggest familiarity with electrical or magnetic effects. Archaeologists have found magnetized artifacts among the Olmec, carved stones aligned to the Earth's magnetic field. While these are not evidence of electricity, they demonstrate the same human impulse to study forces unseen, to integrate them into ritual, orientation, and meaning. It is not hard to imagine that if chance had led them to copper, iron, and acid in the right configuration, they too might have stumbled upon a galvanic effect. When we place the Baghdad battery among these global parallels, its uniqueness begins to soften. Perhaps it was not a lone miracle, but one more instance of humanity's restless curiosity. Across cultures, people noticed that amber could attract, that fish could shock, that lodestones could align, that storms could split the sky. They experimented, they mythologized, they incorporated these forces into healing and ritual. The Baghdad battery, whether used as a true battery or not, fits this broader pattern of engaging with electricity at the edges of understanding. Yet the parallels also sharpen the mystery. Why, if so many cultures brushed against electricity, did none of them develop it further? Why did the Greeks not build machines from amber? Why did the Egyptians not create tools from the shocks of fish? Why did the Mesopotamians not record the principles of their jar? The answer lies perhaps in the nature of electricity itself. Without a framework of theory, without the tools to measure and control it, electricity remained elusive, a force glimpsed but not grasped. It astonished but did not yield to systematic exploitation. Each culture touched it briefly, then let it slip away. Still, the persistence of these encounters suggests that electricity is not entirely a modern discovery. It has always been with us, in the storms above and the creatures of the deep, in the stones we rub and the metals we forge. The Baghdad battery is part of this continuum, an artifact that crystallizes a moment when the force may have been more than curiosity, when it may have been given shape in clay and copper. To see it alongside the amber of the Greeks, the fish of the Egyptians, the rays of the Romans, and the magnets of the Chinese, is to see a hidden thread. A story of humanity reaching again and again toward the same invisible power. In that thread lies a profound truth. The ancients were not ignorant. They were experimenters, observers, dreamers. They noticed what we notice. They wondered as we wonder. They sought patterns and power in the world around them. The Baghdad battery may be singular, but it is not isolated. It is part of a chorus of voices across time, each whispering that electricity was never unknown, only unnamed, only fleeting, only waiting for the age when theory and practice would finally unite to master it. From the moment Koenig proposed that the clay jar from Baghdad might be a battery, the artifact became a battleground. Scholars, archaeologists, engineers, and skeptics have argued over its meaning for more than 80 years. their voices clashing like thunder over a landscape of silence. The jar itself does not speak, but the interpretations around it roar with conviction. The debate among scholars is not merely about one artifact, it is about how we read the past, about what we allow ourselves to believe, and about the boundaries we draw around human ingenuity. Those who support the battery interpretation point to the deliberate design of the object. A clay jar lined with copper, fitted with an iron rod, and sealed with bitumen is not an accident, they insist. Each component seems purposeful, and when assembled together, they replicate, almost perfectly, the anatomy of a galvanic cell. Modern experiments show that such a jar can indeed generate electricity, weak but undeniable. If it works as a battery in the present, why should it not have worked as a battery in the past? For these scholars, the artifact is not speculation, but evidence. A fragment of forgotten science that proves the ancients reached farther than our textbooks admit. Opponents counter with equal passion. They argue that the Baghdad battery is nothing more than a jar for storage, perhaps of sacred scrolls, papyri, or medicines. The copper and iron components, they say, are not electrodes but fittings, practical choices of material for sealing and stability. The resemblance to a battery is a coincidence, a projection of modern categories onto ancient craft. To claim otherwise is to commit anachronism, to force the past into the mold of the present. Without wires, without documentation, without parallel examples, the battery theory, they insist, rests on shaky ground. The debate has been shaped by the weight of evidence, or rather, the lack of it. No Mesopotamian texts describe the use of electricity, no workshops have been discovered filled with jars connected in series, no artifacts plated with metals in a manner that demands electrochemistry. In the absence of such context, skeptics ask, how can one artifact overturn centuries of history? For them, the Baghdad battery is a cautionary tale about the dangers of imagination, a reminder that archaeology must be disciplined by restraint. Yet restraint has never been the only voice in human curiosity. Advocates for the battery theory point to experiments that show electroplating is possible with replicas of the jar. They argue that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Ancient technologies often leave little trace, especially those that rely on perishable materials like wires, solutions, or organic compounds. They suggest that the Baghdad battery may be the lone survivor of a tradition erased by time, war, or neglect. To dismiss it outright, they say, is to underestimate the ingenuity of the ancients. The debate is not only technical, it is philosophical. At its core lies the question of how we imagine history. Do we see progress as linear, a steady climb from ignorance to enlightenment, with each age building upon the last? Or do we see it as fragile, punctuated by brilliance that flares and fades, with knowledge lost as easily as it is gained? If progress is linear, the Baghdad battery cannot be a battery, because electricity belongs to the modern age. If progress is fragile, then the jar may be precisely what it appears, a fragment of genius stranded in time. Within the scholarly world, the debate has sometimes turned sharp. Conferences have hosted heated arguments, journals have published rebuttals and counter-rebuttals. Engineers scoff at archaeologists who deny functionality. Archaeologists dismiss engineers who ignore cultural context. Each side clings to its methods. Each distrusts the other's assumptions. In the middle sits the jar, corroded and silent, indifferent to the storms it provokes. Beyond academia, the debate has spilled into popular culture. Documentaries dramatize the mystery, presenting the jar as a relic of lost science or as a misunderstood container. Books argue both sides, some heralding the Baghdad battery as proof of forgotten civilizations, others condemning the idea as pseudoscience. The public, captivated by the possibility of ancient electricity, often gravitates toward wonder rather than restraint. The debate thus mirrors a deeper tension between scholarly caution and popular imagination. What is striking is that the debate has endured for decades without resolution. Neither side can claim victory. the jar continues to resist certainty. Its design is too suggestive to dismiss, yet its context is too thin to confirm. It exists in a liminal space, a riddle that refuses to be solved. Perhaps this is why it holds our attention so strongly. Certainty would end the story, ambiguity keeps it alive. The debate among scholars reveals something profound about the human relationship with the past. We do not only seek facts, we seek meaning. We want to know not only what the jar was, but what it represents about us. Are we children of a slow, steady climb, or heirs to forgotten empires of knowledge? The Baghdad battery, whether battery or jar, forces us to confront this question. It is less an object than a mirror, reflecting our assumptions back at us, demanding that we consider what we believe possible. And so the argument continues, and perhaps will always continue. The jar remains silent, the evidence incomplete, the interpretations divided. But in that division lies its power. The Baghdad battery ensures that scholars, skeptics, and dreamers alike will keep asking, keep debating, keep wrestling with the fragile boundaries of history. It is a debate not only about clay and copper, but about the very nature of human achievement, about whether the past was simpler than we think or far more complex than we dare to imagine. The Baghdad battery is more than an artifact. It is a fragment torn from a larger fabric we can no longer see. Whether or not it truly served as a battery, it reminds us of a haunting truth. Knowledge is fragile. What is known in one age can be lost in the next, buried in the dust of conquest, fire, or neglect. The mystery of the jar is inseparable from the mystery of how human beings forget, how whole traditions of craft and insight can vanish as though they had never existed. History is filled with such silences. The Library of Alexandria, a beacon of ancient learning, is remembered not for what it preserved, but for what was destroyed. Scrolls that contained discoveries, philosophies, and experiments from across the Mediterranean world were reduced to ash. We can only guess at the treasures lost: mathematics, medicine, astronomy, knowledge that might have changed the course of history had it survived. In that loss, we glimpse the same silence that surrounds the Baghdad battery, a silence in which possibility is drowned. Consider also the Roman concrete that still holds the Colosseum and aqueducts together after 2 millennia. Modern engineers only recently have begun to understand its secrets, how volcanic ash and lime created structures more durable than our own. That knowledge, once common to Roman builders, was forgotten for centuries after the empire fell. Damascus steel, the legendary metal of the Middle East, could slice a hair in midair. Yet by the 17th century, its recipe was lost. Greek fire, the terrifying weapon of the Byzantines, burned even on water. But when the empire collapsed, its formula vanished. The world is littered with fragments of forgotten knowledge, each a reminder that progress is neither steady nor secure. The Baghdad battery fits into this gallery of loss. If it was truly a device for generating electricity, where are the others? Why is there no lineage of jars, no treatises describing their construction, no workshops where artisans trained apprentices to build them? Perhaps there were many, but they perished in time's furnace. Bronze was melted for coin, copper reused, iron corroded, clay crumbled. Wars swept across Mesopotamia, empires rose and fell, and with each collapse, knowledge slipped further into silence. The jar we hold may be the lone survivor of a tradition erased, but even if the jar was not a battery, it still embodies forgotten knowledge. Its very ambiguity proves how much we have lost. We cannot be sure of its purpose because the cultural context that gave it meaning is gone. The tablets that might have explained it are shattered, the voices of the artisans silenced. To us it is a riddle, but to its makers it was ordinary, practical, perhaps sacred. That gap between their clarity and our confusion is the measure of what forgetting means. Forgetting is not always sudden. Sometimes it is slow, a fading of memory as generations pass. A technique once vital becomes less necessary, replaced by new practices, until no one bothers to teach it. The knowledge does not explode into silence. It drifts away like smoke thinning in the wind. Imagine a Mesopotamian artisan showing his apprentice how to assemble a jar with copper and iron. Imagine the apprentice learning, repeating, passing it on. Now imagine one generation failing to teach the next, distracted by war, famine, or new customs. Within decades, the skill is gone. Within centuries, even memory fades. What once was simple becomes impossible. The tragedy of forgotten knowledge is that we rarely recognize it as it happens. For the people who lost Roman concrete or Damascus steel, life went on. Bridges were built, swords were forged, just less durable, less sharp. They did not mourn the loss because they did not know what they had forgotten. Only we, centuries later, see the absence, feel the gap, and wonder at what might have been. The Baghdad battery carries that same ache. Did its makers know they had built something remarkable, or did they too let it slip away unnoticed, unaware that one day strangers from across the world would puzzle over it in glass cases? There is also the unsettling possibility that forgetting's inevitable. Human civilizations rise and fall, each carrying knowledge like a torch. Sometimes the torch is passed, sometimes it is dropped. The darkness that follows is not always total, but it is enough to force rediscovery rather than inheritance. Electricity, if known in ancient Mesopotamia, was not preserved. It had to be stumbled upon again in the experiments of Franklin, Galvani, and Volta. The Baghdad battery thus becomes a symbol of the cycle of discovery and loss, a reminder that we may not be the first to touch the spark, only the first to remember it clearly. To dwell on forgotten knowledge is to confront our own fragility. We imagine that in our digital age, with vast servers and libraries, we are immune to such loss. Yet history warns otherwise. A single catastrophe, war, collapse, decay, can erase centuries of learning. The Baghdad battery whispers across time, telling us that brilliance can vanish, that memory can fail, that even the simplest jar can confound the future. Its silence is as powerful as its possibility, because it shows us the void left when knowledge is forgotten. In the end, whether or not the Baghdad battery was truly a battery may matter less than what it represents. It is an emblem of how much we do not know, how much has slipped away, how thin the thread of continuity really is. It reminds us that human ingenuity has flared many times in the past, but that fire does not always endure. Sometimes it goes out, leaving only smoke and fragments for the future to find. And when we find them, we are left not with answers but with questions, staring into the darkness of forgotten knowledge. The Baghdad battery has always stood at the border between archaeology and imagination. And nowhere is this more apparent than in the fringe theories that surround it. For decades, voices outside the mainstream of scholarship have claimed the jar as proof of truths long hidden, visions of history that stretch far beyond the cautious interpretations of academics. These theories, often dismissed as pseudoscience, nevertheless reveal something important: the hunger of the human mind for wonder, for explanations that connect us to mysteries greater than ourselves. One of the most enduring fringe ideas is that the Baghdad battery is evidence of a lost civilization, a culture advanced far beyond what we usually credit to the ancient world. In this telling, Mesopotamia was not merely the cradle of writing and law, but also the birthplace of technologies that rival our own. The jar, with its copper, iron, and clay, is said to be a survivor of this forgotten age, a relic of knowledge suppressed or erased by catastrophe. Supporters of this theory argue that it is too sophisticated to appear in isolation, that it must belong to a broader tradition of invention that history has somehow buried. Some go further still, connecting the artifact to legends of Atlantis or other mythical civilizations. They suggest that the battery is not Mesopotamian at all, but an heirloom from a people who vanished beneath the waves or into the sands, leaving behind only hints of their brilliance. To them, the Baghdad battery is a clue, a breadcrumb on a trail leading to an entire chapter of human history erased from our memory. The idea is intoxicating because it replaces absence with presence, silence with grandeur. Then there are those who look to the stars. Ancient astronaut theorists claim that the Baghdad Battery is evidence of contact with extraterrestrial beings. According to this view, aliens once visited Earth, shared fragments of their knowledge with humanity, and left behind artifacts that defy explanation. The battery, in their narrative, is not a humble jar, but a gift, a piece of technology seeded among us to nudge our progress forward. Electricity, in this telling, was not discovered, but bestowed. For those who find comfort in the idea that we are not alone, the battery becomes more than archaeology. It becomes cosmic evidence. Others turn the mystery inward, suggesting that the jar is a remnant of human time travelers, evidence of experiments that crossed centuries. This theory, though fantastical, emerges from the sense of anachronism the battery inspires. It seems too modern, too out of place, too strange to belong to the world that produced it. To explain it as an artifact of the future misplaced in the past satisfies the longing for narrative even if it defies logic. Such ideas are less about science than about storytelling, about the ways we bend the past to match the contours of our wonder. There are also occult interpretations. Some fringe writers argue that the battery was never meant to generate electricity as we understand it, but to channel spiritual energy, to act as a vessel of magic rather than science. In this view, the copper, iron, and bitumen were chosen for symbolic reasons, materials aligned with earth, sky, and underworld. The jar becomes not a machine, but a talisman, a device for focusing power, perhaps in rituals of healing, divination, or communication with the divine. Electricity, if produced, would be incidental, a physical echo of a spiritual truth. Mainstream scholars dismiss these fringe theories as fanciful, lacking evidence, driven by imagination rather than excavation. They are right, of course, to demand proof, to insist that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And yet the persistence of these theories reveals something deeper. The Baghdad Battery resists confinement. It is too strange to be explained away as merely a storage jar, too ambiguous to be accepted as a true battery, too evocative to rest quietly in a glass case. In that ambiguity, it invites speculation, and speculation, like water, will always find a crack. What makes the fringe theories powerful is not their accuracy, but their symbolism. They speak to our collective yearning for mystery, for connection to something greater than ourselves. To imagine that the Baghdad Battery links us to Atlantis, to aliens, or to lost civilizations is to affirm that the past holds secrets we have not yet unlocked. It is to say that human history is not a straight line of progress, but a labyrinth of forgotten corridors, some leading to places stranger than we dare to dream. Perhaps, in the end, the fringe theories tell us less about the artifact than about ourselves. We long for stories that lift us out of the ordinary, that replace silence with wonder, that turn clay and copper into keys to cosmic mysteries. The Baghdad Battery provides the perfect canvas. It is broken, ambiguous, resistant to certainty, and therefore infinitely interpretable. Each fringe theory paints it with a different color of imagination, creating a kaleidoscope of possibilities that, while unverifiable, keep the artifact alive in our minds. The jar itself does not care whether it was a battery, a storage vessel, or a gift from the stars. It sits in its glass case, corroded and silent. But around it swirl the dreams of humanity, the desire to see in it proof that the world is stranger than it seems. In that sense, the fringe theories, however implausible, fulfill a purpose. They remind us that archaeology is not only about uncovering facts, but about confronting mystery, and that mystery will always invite stories that stretch beyond the bounds of science. The Baghdad Battery may sit quietly in the Iraq Museum, a corroded jar behind glass, but in the imagination of the modern world, it has traveled far. Since Koenig first suggested its electrical nature, the artifact has slipped beyond the domain of scholars and into the realm of popular culture, where its mystery has been magnified, dramatized, and transformed into legend. Here, the battery is no longer only an archaeological puzzle. It is a symbol, a prop in the grand theater of human fascination with the unknown. Television documentaries were among the first to spread its fame. In the 1970s and 1980s, programs exploring the mysteries of the past presented the Baghdad Battery as evidence of forgotten science. The image of a simple clay jar capable of producing electricity resonated with viewers who had grown accustomed to thinking of electricity as a modern invention. Scientists in white coats poured vinegar into replicas, voltmeters twitched, and sparks sometimes leapt for the camera. These staged experiments thrilled audiences and cemented the battery's place as a staple of archaeological mystery programming. By the 1990s, the artifact had found its way into the growing genre of speculative history. Books with titles invoking lost civilizations, ancient technologies, and forbidden archaeology placed the Baghdad Battery at the center of their arguments. For these authors, it was not merely a jar, but a revelation. Proof that history was incomplete, that humanity's past held secrets more advanced than we dared to admit. The battery became a symbol of suppressed knowledge, an icon cited alongside the pyramids, the Nazca Lines, and the Antikythera Mechanism as evidence that the ancients were far more sophisticated than our textbooks allow. Fiction, too, embraced the battery. In novels of science fiction and adventure, it appears as a relic of power, a device that unlocks hidden technologies or guards the secrets of long-lost civilizations. Sometimes it is cast as a key to time travel, sometimes as a weapon, sometimes as a mystical object coveted by secret societies. The real artifact is modest, producing less than a volt, but in stories it crackles with cosmic energy, transformed by imagination into something limitless. In this way, popular culture magnifies the ordinary into the extraordinary, allowing the Baghdad Battery to shine in ways its makers, if they ever knew of its power, could scarcely have imagined. Even video games and films have not ignored it. Adventure franchises often weave it into quests for ancient artifacts, placing it in hidden temples or forgotten tombs. It becomes part of puzzles that open secret doors, or relics that hint at alien contact. To players and viewers, the battery is not a jar, but a symbol, a shorthand for ancient mystery. Its very ambiguity makes it ideal for such roles, for it resists definition and therefore can be adapted to any narrative that requires a touch of the uncanny. The artifact has also been adopted by fringe theorists and alternative historians in documentaries broadcast to wide audiences. Shows that explore ancient astronauts or lost technologies feature the Baghdad Battery prominently, sometimes presenting it as proof of extraterrestrial intervention. To skeptical eyes, these programs exaggerate and distort, but their cultural influence is undeniable. Millions encounter the artifact not in museums or journals, but in dramatized sequences, where lightning flashes and narrators speak in hushed tones about ancient secrets. For them, the battery is not a puzzle, but a revelation. What is striking is how the Baghdad Battery functions as a cultural mirror. In every era, it reflects the hopes and fears of those who encounter it. To scientists of the mid-20th century, it was a challenge, a test of how far the ancients might have gone. To alternative historians, it is a banner, proof of suppressed knowledge. To novelists and filmmakers, it is a symbol of wonder, a prop that lends their stories the aura of authenticity. To the public, it is an invitation to imagine, to step outside the boundaries of certainty into the realm of possibility. The battery's role in popular culture also reveals our deep hunger for mystery. In a world mapped by satellites and explained by science, we long for enigmas that resist easy answers. The Baghdad Battery, with its simple design and profound implications, is perfect for this role. It is small enough to be grasped, yet strange enough to be unexplained. It demands no elaborate theories to spark wonder, only the suggestion that perhaps electricity was known in antiquity. That suggestion alone is enough to set imaginations alight. Yet, the spread of the artifact in popular culture has a double edge. On one hand, it keeps the battery alive, ensuring that people across the world hear of it and ponder its meaning. On the other, it risks burying it under layers of exaggeration and myth, so that the real object becomes harder to see. For many, the Baghdad Battery exists only as a legend, divorced from its archaeological context, transformed into something larger and stranger than the fragments in the museum. The truth, subtle and uncertain, is often lost beneath the weight of story. Still, perhaps this is the fate of all great mysteries. They live not only in facts, but in myths, not only in glass cases, but in imaginations. The Baghdad Battery, whether it was ever truly a battery, has achieved a kind of immortality in popular culture. It is cited, dramatized, reinvented, and reimagined endlessly. In the process, it reminds us that archaeology is not only about recovering the past, but about inspiring the present, about giving us symbols through which we explore who we are and what we dream of becoming. In popular culture, the Baghdad Battery has become more than clay, copper, and iron. It has become a story, a symbol, a spark that continues to leap across time, igniting wonder wherever it appears. And perhaps that, in the end, is as important as any scientific conclusion. For objects that inspire imagination live longer than those that sit in silence, and the Baghdad Battery, through myth and media, will not soon be forgotten. Electricity is so woven into the fabric of our modern lives that we hardly notice it. It hums in our walls, flickers in our screens, pulses through the cities that never sleep. To imagine a world without it is to imagine silence, darkness, and slowness. Yet, electricity itself is timeless, not bound to the age of generators and grids. Lightning split the skies long before humans walked the earth. The shocks of fish swam in rivers long before we named them. Amber drew dust with static long before philosophers took note. The mystery of ancient electricity lies not in whether the force existed, it always has, but in whether humanity touched it, held it, and perhaps used it long before we think they did. The Baghdad Battery is the most vivid embodiment of this mystery. It sits at the heart of a question that has haunted scholars and dreamers alike. Could the ancients have known electricity not as a curiosity, but as a force to be harnessed? Replicas show it can produce current. Theories suggest it could plate metals, deliver shocks, or inspire awe. Yet the absence of clear evidence leaves us in a liminal space where imagination must fill the gaps. This is the paradox of ancient electricity. It is both undeniable and unproven, both present and absent, both real and elusive. What makes the mystery so compelling is the universality of encounters with electricity across ancient cultures. The Greeks with their amber, the Egyptians and Romans with their electric fish, the Mesopotamians perhaps with their jars. Each culture touched the spark, felt it, named it, but none carried it forward into systematic technology. Why? Perhaps the force was too subtle without modern instruments. Perhaps the practical applications were too limited. Or perhaps knowledge was indeed discovered, nurtured, and then lost in the churn of time. The Baghdad Battery keeps these questions alive, refusing to let us settle into complacency about the inevitability of progress. The idea that electricity may have been known in antiquity unsettles our narrative of history. We like to imagine a straight line, from fire to wheel, from printing press to steam engine, from telegraph to internet. But the battery disrupts that line. It suggests loops and breaks, flashes of brilliance that flare and fade. It asks whether other discoveries, just as profound, may have been made and forgotten. If a clay jar could spark electricity 2,000 years before Volta, what else might have existed before being swallowed by war, disaster, or neglect? The mystery of ancient electricity is also the mystery of forgotten knowledge. For some, this mystery is thrilling. It suggests that humanity has always been capable of more than we think, that the ancients were not primitive but ingenious, reaching toward the same truths we pursue today. For others, it is troubling. It implies that history is not inevitable, that knowledge can vanish, that we might lose in the future what we take for granted today. The Baghdad Battery becomes both hope and warning, proof of human brilliance and evidence of human fragility. The very weakness of the battery's current adds to its enigma. Half a volt, a single volt, is trivial in a world of high voltage lines, but in a world without electricity at all, it would have been astonishing. A tingling in the skin, a spark in the dark, the shimmer of metal changing color, these are small miracles that could inspire awe. The ancients may not have needed electricity to light their temples or power their tools. They may have used it simply to astonish, to consecrate, to adorn. In that sense, the mystery of ancient electricity is not about scale, but about perception. It is about how little it takes to transform the world when the world has never seen it before. The mystery deepens because electricity is invisible. It cannot be seen directly, only felt, only inferred by its effects. To discover it is not to hold it in the hand, but to sense its presence in the sting of a shock, in the attraction of dust to amber, in the twitch of a frog's leg in Galvani's experiments centuries later. To imagine the ancients confronting this invisible force is to imagine them grappling with something uncanny, something that seemed to straddle the line between natural and supernatural. It is this quality that makes the Baghdad Battery so haunting. It is not just a jar, it is a vessel for the unseen. And so the artifact becomes a focal point for questions larger than itself. Was electricity a discovery waiting to be made in every age, only to be forgotten until rediscovered in ours? Was the Baghdad Battery a lone experiment, an accidental curiosity, or part of a wider tradition we no longer remember? Did the ancients see it as science, as magic, or as divine? Each answer changes our understanding not only of the jar, but of humanity itself. The mystery of ancient electricity is in truth the mystery of us, how we learn, how we forget, how we dream. The Baghdad Battery's silence ensures the mystery will endure. It offers us fragments but not explanations, hints but not conclusions. It is an open door onto a past that refuses to be simple, a past that might have known sparks in clay jars long before the hum of modern power. The mystery of ancient electricity is not solved in experiments or in arguments. It lives in the tension between what is possible and what is proven, between what we want to believe and what we can know. And in that tension, like a faint current running unseen, it continues to flow. The Baghdad Battery rests today in silence, its corroded fragments displayed in glass, its mystery unresolved. Visitors pass by, some glancing briefly, others pausing to peer into the cracked clay and darkened copper, wondering how such an ordinary object could have inspired so many extraordinary theories. The truth remains elusive, yet in that elusiveness lies its power. The battery is no longer only an artifact. It has become a mirror in which we see our own relationship with the past, our yearning for certainty, our hunger for wonder, and our fear of forgetting. To reflect on the Baghdad Battery is to reflect on the fragility of knowledge. We imagine history as a steady climb, yet again and again we encounter fragments that disrupt the line. A jar that may have sparked electricity 2,000 years before Volta. A set of gears beneath the sea at Antikythera that mapped the heavens before clocks existed. A blade of Damascus steel sharper than our modern forges could replicate for centuries. Each fragment whispers that progress is not inevitable, that brilliance can be forgotten, that the past holds secrets as dazzling as the present. The Baghdad Battery stands among these echoes, reminding us that human ingenuity is ancient, fragile, and endlessly surprising. The whispers of the artifact reach further still. They remind us that the ancients were not so different from us. They too marveled at the world, experimented with materials, blended science with ritual, and sought to harness forces beyond their understanding. Whether the battery was a tool, a talisman, or simply a jar misinterpreted, it embodies that universal human impulse to reach, to grasp, to wonder. It tells us that curiosity is timeless, that the spark of discovery is not confined to laboratories and universities, but lives in every age, waiting for the right combination of chance and imagination. The ambiguity of the Baghdad Battery is part of its enduring allure. If we knew for certain what it was, it might fade into the background of history, catalogued and explained. But because we do not, it lingers in the imagination, a story half told, an invitation to speculate. In that ambiguity, it becomes larger than itself. It is not only about electricity, but about the limits of our knowledge, about the silences in history, about the way we fill those silences with dreams. The jar is not only clay, copper, and iron, it is possibility, suspended in time. Some will always dismiss it as coincidence, a jar misread by modern eyes. Others will insist it is proof of forgotten science, evidence that the ancients touched electricity and then lost it. Between these poles lies the truth, unknowable yet compelling. Perhaps the battery was both more and less than we think. Perhaps it was not electricity as we define it, but some other use that made sense in its own age. Perhaps the very act of wondering about it is its real gift, forcing us to confront the vastness of what we do not know. To stand before the Baghdad battery is to stand before a whisper of the past. It does not shout, it does not proclaim, it does not reveal its secrets. It murmurs softly, daring us to listen. In its silence, we hear echoes of lost workshops, forgotten rituals, vanished knowledge. We hear the laughter of artisans who once shaped copper and iron, the prayers of worshippers who once touched the jar in awe, the curiosity of minds who once wondered what might happen if liquid met metal in clay. The whispers are faint, but they endure, carried across centuries to our ears. The reflection the battery offers is not only about the past, but about the future. If knowledge can be lost, it can be lost again. If brilliance can fade, ours can fade too. The Baghdad battery warns us that memory is fragile, that preservation is essential, that the sparks of our age may one day be fragments in a museum, puzzling the descendants who wonder what we once knew. It challenges us to cherish our knowledge, to guard it, to share it, to ensure that it does not vanish into silence as so much has before. And yet, there is hope in the battery as well. Its survival, however accidental, proves that even in the tides of forgetting, fragments endure. A jar buried, forgotten, rediscovered, now sparks conversation across the world. The past does not vanish completely. It leaves whispers, hints, questions. It leaves us the chance to rediscover, to remember, to imagine. The Baghdad battery is one such whisper, faint but insistent, telling us that the human story is richer and stranger than we know. In the end, the mystery may never be solved, and perhaps it does not need to be. The power of the Baghdad battery lies not in certainty, but in wonder. It asks us to look backward and forward at once, to see in a small clay jar the vast sweep of human curiosity. It reminds us that the past is not closed, that history is not finished, that even the simplest objects can open doors into realms of possibility. It is a whisper from the deep time of humanity, fragile yet enduring, echoing still. The Baghdad battery is not only an artifact, it is a story, a symbol, a question. And in its silence, it continues to speak, reminding us that we are not only creatures of the present, but heirs to mysteries older than memory. Mysteries that still wait in the dust, the ruins, and the whispers of the past.